RDA meeting, so we apologize for starting just a few minutes late. Let's start by getting a roll call of our council members, starting at the end with Councilman Meekum. Councilman Meekum.
Summerhays present.
Ince present.
Hurst present.
McEwen here.
Thank you. We have all 5 council people present. So let us proceed. Let's start with a prayer or thought from Councilman Ince.
Just a prayer tonight. Our Father which art in heaven, we bow our heads before thee at the beginning of this city council meeting and give thanks. We give thanks, Father, for the privilege and opportunity of living in this country. We give thanks for the privilege and opportunity of living in this state and in this city. We are thankful for the circumstances in which we meet. We pray, Father, for our country and fellow citizens at this time, and with the difficulties that we have with conflict within our country, with the coronavirus, which is causing problems and deaths within our country, and other difficulties. We pray for thy Spirit to be with us, each on an ongoing basis, and during this council meeting, that we might be fair and honest and say these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. If you'd all rise and repeat the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Always an honor. I watched something over the holidays called Sons of Liberty and reminded me of the great freedoms that we have in this country. Let's start with the open session. This is an opportunity where the public has to express their opinions or feelings on good or bad, that are the things that are taking place in the community. Maybe bring some things to our attention. I do want to make known to you that we do have 3 public hearings, so it's not necessarily during this open session to comment on the public hearing on the zone map amendment on 553 South Island View Drive, or the public hearing on the final subdivision plat for the lane at 644 West 400 South, or the public hearing on the zoning and texting amendment residential development standards. Those things that you will have your opportunity to comment about those during those public hearings. So the open session on other things that might be on your mind. Those that are in attendance, please come to the podium and announce your name and where you're from. Those that are online, we have on screen the phone-in information, and I will look at Jennifer to see if there is anybody waiting online. And do that, the same thing online, identify yourself and where you're from. So the open session is now open.
Thank you. I am Blaine Randall, Centerville resident. I have been for most of my life. I'm not going to argue. I'm just making a point of interest. Mayor, on your issue on your community foundation and your community cares issue, you stated that your articles of organization, you were listed as a nonprofit. The copy I got shows that you intended as a 501(c) and to operate under the bylaws of the 501(c) as a nonprofit. You all have copies of that in your email inboxes. Let me say something about, I don't care what the confusion is. If there's confusion about the donations, you broke my heart. I gave in good faith, trying to help people, and all you've done has been nothing but backbiting. You've just trashed me. Your police officers, they've done nothing but cause me problems. The community has caught on to this. You do need to understand that it did break outside of Troy Rollins. This hasn't made it to the Justice Department. The U.S. Attorney that I've been working with has been getting all of your documents that Fox News has given me through the grammar request. So good luck. I can't say anything more than that. I just know when people come out in good faith to help our community, and whether there's mistakes made or not, that's debatable. But if there's mistakes made, try to rectify it. Don't just run away from them. You've done more damage to the community in this. You've created a lot of decisiveness. Yes, you seem very popular, but people do murmur. Anyway, that's all I have to say, and I appreciate your time for listening. And thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Randall. There's a lot of good that is done in the community, and we thank all those that are doing good, including yourself. You're welcome to talk with me on any personal matters on the organization of that. I can answer those questions. But thank you for those comments. Any others in the audience? And looking at Jennifer, if there's anyone online. If not, we will move from the open session and we will go to item number E on the agenda. This is the business of the meeting. This is the first item is a public hearing on the zone map amendment on 553 South Island View Drive regarding the Schmucker property. This has come before council many times in the past, but we have a couple things on the agenda in relation to this tonight. Corey, do you have any more comments that we need to know further on this? Anything from Lisa? Any questions that council members have? The applicant, anything they may have before we go to a public hearing?
I might just ask what the time frame for the review of the 25-foot distance to the gas line. It was mentioned in the report. Has that been reviewed?
The last communication between Mr. Smucker and the city engineer indicated that Kevin had reviewed the information, and I didn't hear back what his final measurement was, but he indicated that he's completed his review.
Okay, so that part should be okay. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions before we go to the public hearing on this? So if not, this is a public hearing. This is on the zone map amendment in relation to 553 South Island View Drive. We're considering a zoning map amendment for the property located at that address from public facility low to residential low. That is, public hearing is now open. Once again, those that are in person, state your name and where you're from, and the same thing, those that are online, I'll give it 30 seconds or so to those that may comment online. Nothing online. All right, we will close that public hearing then, and we will look for any further questions or from members of council.
I would motion, Mayor, that we approve ordinance 2022-02.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Do we have any further discussion on it?
Just one quick question to Lisa. Lisa, do we make that still subject to the same item number one that the Planning Commission recommended, that we still have that?
Yes.
Sorry, not number two within the recommendation, that it's still the review. It sounded like they should have done it, but should isn't did.
Yeah, in the staff report, there are some conditions of approval on the rezone. Typically, we don't add conditions, but given the timing of this
Correct.
chicken and egg question,
Yep.
yeah, I believe in the ordinance, those conditions are set forth as well as the findings. So they are in the ordinance.
That's all I got.
Okay. Any further discussion? Okay, let's do a roll call vote starting at the end.
Aye.
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 That motion passes 5-0. Thank you. Let's go to item number 2. This is a boundary line adjustment with quitclaim deed on the same property. This is approving quitclaim deed for transfer of city property to Andrew and Janet Schmucker.
Sure, I can address that.
Go ahead, Lisa.
As you know, the city council has entered into a boundary line agreement with the Schmuckers for approximately 3,000 square feet of property they're purchasing from the city. We have accomplished all of the tasks that were required to actually transfer the property, and so this is the final action that was tabled from the last time, and so staff is requesting again that the council approve the quitclaim deed. I do appreciate the council's questions and concerns about some of the details. And just to let you know, we still have a final review. The city engineer and the city attorney still need to review the final plat. We typically have a round of corrections before the plat will be recorded. Same thing with the quitclaim deed. The legal description will be finalized with whatever legal description is on the final plat. So, but we believe all of these can be handled at a staff level, and recommend approval of the quitclaim deed and authorize staff to record the appropriate documents for transfer of the property.
Are we approving the quitclaim deed or the process of proceeding with the quitclaim deed? I'm confused because I don't have a deed.
Either way, there is a deed in the packet, as well as the boundary line agreement that explains the process. Either way you'd like to do that, we are requesting that you accept the deed as to form, because anything that's recorded, the mayor and the city recorder have to sign that approved as to form. So you could say, we approve the quitclaim deed as to form, subject to minor substantive changes to the legal description prior to recording.
That's page 21, I think, of our packet, is the deed form.
And of course, we will be collecting the funds from the Schmuckers as well for the transfer of the property, which will occur prior to recording.
I'll make a motion, Mayor.
Sure.
There's no others. Make a motion to approve the quitclaim deed, subject to minor edits as necessary by city staff, for transfer of city property to Andrew and Janice Schmucker, and authorize mayor to sign the deed on behalf of the city, subject to final approval and recording of the exchange of title, amended final plat, vacation and relocation of easements, and rezone of the subject property.
Second.
We have a motion, a second. Further discussion? Did you find that deed on page 21, Councilman Eds?
No, but apparently I'm looking at the wrong spot. Go ahead.
Okay. If there's no further discussion, let's do a roll call vote. We'll start with Councilman Summerhays.
Aye.
Am I right?
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
That motion passes 5-0. Thank you. Item number 3 on our agenda tonight. This is another public hearing matter in regards to the final subdivision plat at the lane at 644 West, 400 South. Corey, do you want to come up and give us some background on that in addition to what we have in our information packet?
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. This is a request for a subdivision plat. This is a little bit unique because it's a single lot family subdivision, but it's being developed also in a residential medium zone, which we allow single family development in those multifamily zones. It will be a planned unit development, so you're looking at your section of your subdivision ordinance that's called PUD development, planned unit development. Don't get it confused with PDO. They can be similar, but in this case, they're just using the standard planned unit development. That is very common in this type of development where they have common space, some private roads, subject to our residential medium standards. How a subdivision gets designed in a PUD development is through a site plan process. That site plan is reviewed and approved by the Planning Commission against the RM zoning standards. They have received conceptual acceptance and final site plan approval from the Planning Commission, along with the preliminary subdivision plat approval by the Commission. This is the last step to prepare a plat for recording. The Planning Commission reviews that final plat against their approvals. They found it consistent with the site plan approval process, and so they forwarded a recommendation for positive approval of the plat. And so what you should see is the site plan is now being translated with some boundaries so that the individual lots can be sold. The detention, the road, and an entry common feature will be held in common by the homeowners association with the project. You'll see a subsequent item where some of the stormwater management plan entering with the city is that they have an easement to discharge some of the stormwater through an adjacent piece of property as part of that agreement. So it'll wrap up to finalize this in order for them to be able to record a plat to sell the homes. Because right now they could build the homes and rent them, but they would not be able to sell them without the plat. So they're requesting approval of the plat. Planning Commission finds it consistent with what they've approved. So we're recommending approval.
Questions for Corey right now?
You don't see any issues at all that we need to be concerned with?
Not with the issues of compliance with ordinance.
That was a loaded answer.
Well, it's an interesting project to move a multifamily zone into single-family development, but it's not unlike the Sheffield Downs process. So it'll just be interesting from a planner's perspective where you have townhomes on one side, commercial on another, single-family homes in between, but it's a very narrow piece of property and is somewhat difficult to develop without doing some type of planned unit development layout. So
So are they getting, I looked and I couldn't find a picture. Are all 12 of them on the one side of the road?
no, it will enter onto the east side and then it will take a serpentine left down the middle of the property. You'll have homes on both sides at that point with two at the very north end at the end of a T, which functions as their emergency turnaround. Oh, did you see a picture of it?
I couldn't find one.
Set of plan drawings was in the packet.
I looked through it, I couldn't see it. I guess I just didn't look at the right.
So yeah, as you enter, you'll have the white home that you see on the left, it's on Porter Lane. You have the Porter Walton Townhomes. You'll have an entrance located there with the east side being east and west side, but it'll be loaded mostly with the road onto the west side of the property. And then it will serpentine to the center and put homes on each side.
Corey, I got one question for you and then one question for Lisa. First question is it looks like they got Dual Creek taken care of because it's going north out, it's going to affect UDOT. So the next question is looks like on the correspondence, Kevin's said, hey, we're fine from a Dual Creek standpoint, but they need to contact UDOT if they control that pipe. Has the UDOT drainage been sorted out as it relates to that?
It was the Davis County. You're talking about the Davis County drainage channel?
Yes.
Yeah, it's a culvert system. There should be.
In Kevin's email, he talked about that he had said that he may need to contact UDOT if they strictly control the pipe and connection discharge in the I-15 frontage road. That, I'm just reading it from the
I'm trying to
email
think of UDOT.
in our packet. So this is
It was an email
This is a
letter.
Carl Hansen email to Kevin and team, I guess, and they just wanted to provide record in an email format that,
I'm not recalling UDOT being involved.
so that's why I'm asking the question.
Yeah, the county floodplain for Porter Lane is an involvement with a county permit, and Kevin checked with them and discussed the project with them. He received an email back saying that the county is not going to require a flood area permit.
Correct. I'm just referring to the email.
Did Kevin just say UDOT instead of county?
It's from Carl Hansen to Kevin. It's not
Right.
from Kevin.
I am not familiar with that
Okay, it's in the
email.
packet.
It's the email from the county that Kevin forwarded to us.
Right, that's the county, not UDOT.
Correct. The county's saying that they're okay with it, but he's saying they may need to check with UDOT for the discharge. So
I'm not aware of why UDOT discharge would be involved because it's,
Again, I don't know why either, other
yeah,
than,
because
Is
other
that,
than Carl Hansen
The
had stated
drainage
as
goes
such.
under I-15.
That's what I'm
That's what I
assuming.
assumed.
yeah,
Well,
but I
that's why I
think we
wanted to make
have,
sure
but I
that
think we
UDOT
have, I think we have an interlocal agreement for the discharge of all our water through that pipe.
Okay, but
Okay.
I just wanted to make sure that, yes, the county was
Yeah.
fine, that was clear.
Yeah, since it's in the email, I would just add a condition that that get verified if it is indeed UDOT that has to sanction that. Because it's not something that hit my radar.
It's a page 130 of the packet or 131 of the email that he's referencing.
My second question, Lisa, on these CCNRs for associations, from a city perspective, what are you looking at, if at all, for protections for the city or management?
CCNRs are typically private covenants that run with the land for projects. Occasionally, the city ordinances require that the city review those and require the CCNRs to handle maintenance of any kind of open space or common space in the project, or if there's any public, private infrastructure, such as a private street and those sorts of things. So my review is typically limited to that. However, I still have to read the whole thing.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure there wasn't something else. I thought the same, but I wanted to just confirm that, not miss anything. Okay, that's all I got, thanks.
are you the applicant? Great. So this is a public hearing matter. The applicant is welcome to make a presentation as well, too. Yeah. Sorry I didn't come down and greet you beforehand. We just had, so just tell us who you are and where you're from and tell the council other things that, as the applicant, you'd like them to hear.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Mayor and council members. My name is Zach Swenson. I work for CW Urban and represent CW The Lane on this development project. A few things I just wanted to touch base on. This roughly 2 acre development, it does fall in the residential medium area. The challenge with residential medium in Centerville is that the density that is permitted in residential medium, it doesn't really allow for any additional units above and beyond what the 12 site or 12 lot subdivision that we currently proposed. So that's why we chose to pursue a single family development. There is currently a single family home at the frontage of that site, so it does mesh well with that. As for the UDOT application, that too, or the UDOT correspondence, that too was new to me. So I'm happy to look into that. My understanding was that the construction permit would have been required based on proximity of the south property line to the canal. It's across the street, the canal is, and the water flows elsewhere. So I guess I just hadn't really understood how that would be correlated to our storm drain, which is at the north side of our property. I'm happy to answer any questions. I really appreciate the chance to be here. Thank you.
Thanks, Zach. Questions for Zach before we go to the public hearing portion? There may be some after, so stay around. So if there's no other questions for Zach right now, let's go to the public hearing. This is a public hearing on the Lane, the final subdivision plat at 644 West, 400 South. This is the opportunity for the public to ask any questions, make comments. So once again, it is on your screen for those that are joining by Zoom, and those that are in person, please come to the microphone and identify yourself. So the public hearing on this matter, the Lane 644 West 400 South, is now open. Giving them long enough online. Do we have anybody online? Jennifer?
We have a D. Hansen on Zoom. I'm not sure if they want to comment during this hearing or if they're here for a different item. D. Hansen, you're on Zoom.
That's my dad. I'm sure he's just listening.
Okay,
He listens
never
every day.
mind. Never mind.
So Dee, we're just assuming you're not commenting on this one. So, okay, so great. We will close the public hearing on this matter, and let's come back to any further questions for staff and or the applicant.
I hate to put a condition on UDOT. If staff feels like it's been taken care of. I understand what the applicant's saying, Corey. We talked about this in planning commission when I was a commissioner, where there was proximity and maybe the county would get involved, but now they're going north, have an easement through Truck World and discharges out.
Through the city system on the frontage road.
Correct, and so that's why I think the
Yeah,
email
I
correspondence.
just asked Mike why we would get that recommendation for UDOT, and Mike's like, no, it's where we distribute the drainage and affect the floodplain, the flood area, that's the county easement all the way out for the discharge through the county. So we're not thinking that that's connected anything with UDOT. Going out to the frontage road is a city system, and then it's captured and again put under the pipes that we have an agreement with. So we're at a staff level confused why UDOT's in that process, but I just set a condition because if they do have jurisdiction, we ought to honor them to take a look at it.
Carl was just said that in his email just because of a passing.
Yeah, even with Mike, we're a little perplexed on that, so. But I don't want to upsert UDOT if they have say in it. So I would say if it's applicable, that they obtain approval if it's applicable.
But Corey, since it's a plat that we're recording, if they have jurisdiction, I don't know why we need the writer to say if they have jurisdiction. They'll do that anyway, right?
That's true. That's true.
Will UDOT be signing on the plat?
No. They don't have a signature block.
That's what I was gonna, so maybe George clarify that a little bit.
If UDOT has standing, that's where I'm having a hard time with this. If UDOT has standing, why would, plat maps, I've never really been concerned about where UDOT's standing is on this particular one. So I'm not sure why we would say this plat is recordable except if UDOT says no. If they say no, they're going to say no to drainage and they'll have to come back anyway.
Yeah, I agree with you, Councilman McEwen, is that it's the balance of if we're using a state facility, obviously they have jurisdiction over that facility. But conditioning a plat on the subdivision, no, they should not have authority to turn down a subdivision. It's just whether the subdivision would be held up because there needs to be an additional agreement to discharge the water.
So it sounds like it does not need to be a condition of the plat.
But I'm not an attorney, but I tried to play one just a second ago, so you might ask our city attorney.
Lisa, do you have any recommendations for us?
Again, I think with Corey, it's fine to add a condition. I would just say, direct staff and the applicant to confirm any requirement from UDOT. The thing is, it's not applicable to the plat per se, but you are also approving construction drawings along with that plat. And so that's the connection here in terms of a final subdivision plat approval as well as the construction. I doubt it's applicable given the discussion, but it's easy enough to just add a condition and we'll double check on it before it's recorded.
Conditions back on.
I would say to just keep it broad though, to say, direct staff and the applicant to address any UDOT issues listed in the Carl Hansen email from October 19th, 2021.
Any further questions? If not, Councilman Summers, you want to make a motion then on that one? with that condition you're talking about?
Yeah, as I'm writing it down, but Bill, were you going to say something? Did I hear you?
I was going to say I can as well.
Yeah, go ahead.
ahead.
Bill, he's deferring to you.
Yeah.
Okay, I would make a motion that we approve the final subdivision plat for the lane 644 west, 400 south, subject to staff confirming that there is no need for any UDOT approval, which is what we believe. Is that adequate, Lisa?
Second.
Motion second, further discussion? Start with a roll call vote going by right, go with Councilman Ince.
Aye.
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 That motion passes 5-0. Let's move on to item 4, which also relates to this. This is the storm facilities maintenance agreement with the 644 West 400 South Lane subdivision. Lisa?
So yes, you have before you the stormwater facility maintenance agreement for the lane. As you've seen, a number of these projects now are required to enter into a maintenance agreement to take care of their storm drain facilities long-term. These are for the developer or the homeowners association to maintain these facilities, all private facilities. So we're just recommending approval of that. There are 2 versions of the agreement in your packet, 2 corrected versions. One is just our standard agreement, and then the other one is the one that's already been signed and executed by the lane along with their long-term stormwater facility maintenance plan.
Are there any differences between the two besides the signatures?
Not the agreement. The second one just has the signature as well as the attachments. The legal description is Exhibit A, and then the stormwater maintenance plan is Exhibit B.
Further discussions, questions for Lisa on that?
I would motion that we approve the stormwater agreement as presented and recorded.
Second.
Motion is second. Further discussion? If not, let's do a roll call vote. We'll start at the end with Councilwoman Hurst.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
That motion passes unanimously. Thank you. Thank you, Corey. Thank you, Zach. Thanks for being here tonight. Let's go to item number 5. This is, looks like our last public hearing matter tonight. This is a public hearing zoning text amendment on residential development standards in relation to residential medium. Corey, you want to talk about this?
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. As I indicated to the Planning Commission the other night, you log on to our cyberspace and it takes 30 seconds to do something, and that's way too long. Get down to where we measure life in 30-second increments. That's getting a little scary. The petition before you is coming from Mr. Chad Morris for amendments to the residential medium zone. I don't see Mr. Morris present. Maybe he's on the Zoom meeting. Mr. Morris has been doing a development. You may be familiar with it. It's Canyon Point, which is on 400 East and just on the south side of 400 North, behind the street. It's an infill project that he's had interested in over a period of time. He's looking at that. That's an RM zone, and in some of his conceptual layout, he raised some issues in discussion with staff on some elements he feels that the RM zone should change. And so he's put that on a hiatus and is pursuing this direction for these amendments. So we're assuming that there is some related connection to his project driving it, although understand that these amendments would be accepted throughout the RM zone, not just his particular project. And so he is attempting to influence the zoning district or the RM as a whole. His request consists of looking at 3 components. One is a density. Right now, the residential medium zone is capped in a 6-unit per acre permitted element. As you recall, in some of our zones, we've had a permitted density and we've had a conditional use density. Back in, I think it was 2017, the city took the RM zone and eliminated the two categories of 4 permitted up to 8 conditional, and chose to hit the middle of the road, if you will, to 6 units permitted, and left off the other 2 units from that original RM zone density. In addressing the density, Mr. Morris is correct. The general plan lists medium up to 8 units an acre. So it is consistent with the general plan policy itself to request those 8 units an acre, because we do have that kind of missing 6 or 7 and 8 element in the medium category under the general plan. We did bring up, though, at a staff level, that we're uncomfortable in the whole overall policy and have been uncomfortable splitting the multifamily zones into a permitted area and a conditional area. The problem with that is the conditional use process evolved through time, particularly the state legislature being involved. Conditional uses basically are treated as you're allowed to do those. You get a chance as a city to do a little extra review to see how it relates to the project, meaning how it impacts and how do you mitigate those impacts. But if they can mitigate those impacts, you're obligated to give them that conditional use density. You can no longer say, well, we don't want to give it to you based on we think it's too much. Simple as that. You have to have mitigating factors that cannot be handled by the developer. So it came down to staff's view of the density issue is how do you determine in a reasonable fashion of evidence and statistics that says you can do 7 on this project, you can do 7.5 on that project, you can do 8 on that project. How do you get to the point where you can tie in that 1 unit an acre difference can take you from 8 down to 7, 7 down to 6, 6 down to 5, because 4 was the original permitted density. So we're uncomfortable at a staff level, even though the general policy sits there, we're uncomfortable categorizing it as a conditional use. So we think we should be shifting that all around. We should be changing that, we should be deciding our density amount, and then our design standards around that. The upcoming general plan that we've had as a goal, and it was also made some application to for some assistance funds. We think we ought to holistically address that. So staff recommended that we not consider the density change at this point until we better get a handle on how we want to handle densities throughout the city. Because this would affect every RM zone or a request for an RM zone if we approved that request. The second element has to deal with the width of the lane widths. If you recall, the Porter Walton was kind of the driving factor on Porter Lane, just east of the lane project that you just saw tonight. That sits at around, I believe, 24-foot width. It allows the two-way traffic. There was a lot of discussion during that project about the roads being too narrow. The idea also plays into driveway lengths. If you have a crew cab dually and you have an 18-foot driveway or 20-foot driveway, you're going to be sticking out across the sidewalk or the park strip or even into the street. And so there were fire issues where 24 feet doesn't really allow you to do on-street parking. So if somebody does park on the street, there's no room for the fire apparatus truck to go around. And so the city in 2017 changed it for 27 feet of asphalt. And then your 2.5-foot curb and gutters. That's a pretty typical street cross-section that we have now. So that allows a parking, at least on one side of the street, and still allows the 20 feet of access lane for a fire apparatus on a private road. And so that's where the city landed. We're going to do some on-street parking allowances on one side of the street, It'll maintain the 20 feet needed for the fire apparatus. So we want 27 feet of pavement and then your curb and gutter. And we do have a city spec. Even though it's a private road, we want you to put the road base and the asphalt widths and depths, not widths, depths, to meet city spec, because we want that street to have longevity based on that this is going to be a private street and funds will be spent by the HOA. We want a more longevity street. Mr. Morris would like to change that and make it to 26, so it'd actually be 23 feet, or 20, let me get my math right. We got 2.5, so that's 5 feet. So he wants to reduce it from 27 feet down to the 23 feet with a drivable surface of curb and gutter, so it gets you back up to the 24 feet in, or 26 feet in width. So he's reducing it by a foot in its total width, but he's not really doing it just with the asphalt. He's reducing the asphalt down to 23 and saying, as long as you have a drivable curb and gutter that'll accommodate the fire access and the on-street parking, the fire department's okay. And that's true. He has an email saying the fire department's okay with that. Our struggle on our end, talking with the city engineer, is now we have to engineer the curb, gutter, and sidewalk to hold the loads of the fire apparatus, and our city engineer was not satisfied with that. So our city engineer said, let's stick to the 27 feet of asphalt width, then the curb and gutter system on top of it. And so, again, staff recommended to the Planning Commission that we not change that 27-foot width, as Mr. Morris wanted to do. The third element that Mr. Morris wanted to amend was the sidewalk system. He has a development where a good portion of his roadway will not have homes fronting. And so he didn't want to put sidewalk on both sides. That's the typical standard, sidewalks on both sides of the street. However, the ordinance already gives an out. It says unless otherwise approved as an alternative system. So we've had a couple of developments. Mr. Morris's current conceptual plan is one of them that we accepted, is that they're providing, instead of sidewalk on both sides, there's areas where they're providing an alternative system for units to access. The lane is another one, doing the same thing that you just passed under the site plan. Part of their road and entry has sidewalk on one side, but they have crossings established for where the homes are on both sides of the street. So again, we felt that the ordinance already allowed some flexibility, but that flexibility wasn't a default. You get out of one of the sidewalks. You have to provide an alternative path that's acceptable for all of the units to get throughout the development. So we thought the flexibility was already there to some degree because he had already received that in his conceptual approval. So we felt like that was moot in his third item. So with that, we presented our arguments to the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission did debate it. There is some discussion at the Planning Commission level that we probably ought to talk about densities in the general plan. And because that was upcoming, it probably is best to wait until we have that discussion. So the Planning Commission then recommended a denial of the amendments at this point. So the recommendation to you is to deny the amendments, and if you so want to, a caveat until we address them later, if need be. Long-winded, sorry. But when you get with the denial, I want there on the record what was discussed.
Corey, I do have a question for you, Corey, that's related, and you may not have the facts and figures at your disposal, but best guess would work. Since the changes in density in 2017, how many residential units have been built in the city?
You're right, I don't have it off the top of my head, but I quick guess you have the Sheffield Downs, I think was developed under that, 6 units an acre. It's the lane that you saw tonight is at 6 units an acre. Chad Morris's conceptual, the applicant, is at 6 units an acre. I believe those are the only 3. I would normally tell you, Councilman McEwen, 60-40, but I don't think that works in this case.
No, not in this particular case, but no, that's helpful. And then, of course, the upcoming development for Symphony would be at the same density, right? Or 4 per unit, because that's low, right?
They're at 4 because they're in the RL.
Or low, yeah.
And they're just under because they're at 63 instead of the 68.
So my point in asking the question, and of course, when we talk about this more with the planning commission will be is, you know, there's some belief that the density has been too low and we haven't been successful in attracting construction builds in the city. And I would argue that we've been fairly successful in both the density changes in attracting development.
That's like what I call art on the wall.
And I would disagree with that, and to have, exclude a single-family symphony development. You have 3 small developments in the matter of 5 years during an exceptional growth period. That's stifling growth. Again, I'm not a proponent of excess growth. I'm a proponent of family-centered, community-centered growth, but I disagree with that.
I think if you check for the years before, it probably is more. I think this is I mean, we changed because we were telling people no, because 8 was not fitting into the areas that, we have very few areas that are medium density, or we had people coming in. And I think Chad Morris's is an excellent where he's just bought backyards of properties. So his development is going in the backyards of people. I think we can all agree. I was never so flabbergasted as when I looked out Spencer's window. And I think I don't want to do that to anybody. It kind of changed my opinion on some things that I think to do too many when we're allowing them in the middle of existing and usually smaller homes, because most of it is in the older part of Centerville, that I think, you know, where we have 6 in an area like that is probably as many as we would want to do in people's backyards. I think that's you know, if we had a lot of ground that we could just go out and develop, it would be one thing, but where they're kind of having to grab up backyards or whatever to put enough pieces together to do that. I'm pleased that we have 6, so it will fit there, and I think that's why we changed, was we told a few people no, and we felt like we were saying no more than we wanted to, and we wanted to be proactive. So we went with the 6, so we could be proactive and say yes to some of these developments. So I would definitely not be in favor of changing it at this time.
I want to clear up one thing on the city council transmittal report, the application zoning ordinance text amendment. As we get to page 202, it says planning commission vote 4-1, but I see it marked as 7-0. Was it 7-0, not 4-1?
Yes, that's my error on the report. It was a unanimous vote.
It's a unanimous vote. I was present for that. There was a subsequent vote that was 4-1.
Yeah.
Okay. I thought that was the case, just wanted to clear it up.
Nope, that's a good question.
Public hearing, correct, Mayor?
Yes, this is, And if the applicant or his representative, I don't see the applicant or representative either in person or online, they have the opportunity to present as well on this. And then we can come back to further questions, unless you have further questions right now for Corey before I go to public hearing. Okay. Applicant, anybody online? I don't see any, or in person, so we will skip the applicant presentation, and we will just go to the public hearing. This is a public hearing on the zoning text amendment in relation to residential development standards in a residential medium. So that public hearing is now open. Once again, those in person, come to the microphone, identify yourself, where you're from. Same thing with those. They're online. You see the dial-in, and or if you're on Zoom, the chance to raise your hand. So that is now open. We'll give it a bit of time for the transmission. Are you looking Zoom too on raised hands potentially?
Yeah, I would get a beep beep if somebody tried to call into Zoom, so.
Enough time? Okay, that public hearing is now closed. So let's come back to if there's any further comments or questions from council at all on anything that's been said before I ask for a motion.
Mayor, I think this is a fantastic case study as it relates to the education for our community in terms of density and architecture and how our built environment fits together. When this application was presented to the Planning Commission, there was a petition that was signed by the community members, 32 of them, it's on record, signed a petition that noted higher density than 6 is not compatible with surrounding single dwelling structures. The grand irony of this petition is that 17 of the 32 petitioners live in the Granite Townhomes development, which is built at a density greater than 6 units per acre. But yet, they live there and they love it. And I believe their neighbors also don't mind them living there. So there's a little bit of a disconnect, or a great disconnect, I believe, in our public education as it relates to density. People hear high density and I think they think of Legacy Trails or Legacy Crossing or Pioneer 3-story townhome, and they forget the definition of what's been implemented from an ordinance standpoint. And so I think what people are missing is definitionally what is the density in our city. And I look forward to reviewing it in the general plan, and as a commissioner, I denied this request for the other very reasons that other commissioners did as well, because it's not right timing, number one. Number two, I think it's poor practice to implement a text amendment that affects the entire city without consideration to other properties. You may create unintended consequences. But when people say that they are not in favor of higher than 6 units per acre, when in fact they live in more than 6 units per acre, I think there needs to be some education, and I look forward to that as part of the general plan update.
Thank you.
What is the density of that Granite townhomes that you mentioned?
Corey, you want to address that?
They are also in RM zone, and they were at 10 units gross acreage, so you're measuring the half street. So they're probably netting out closer to, or they're at 10 unit, there are 10 units in there, 8 units an acre, net is probably closer to 9 if you take away the half street. Because it's gross acreage we measured on, so all of your streets count as part of your gross
When you say
density.
the half street, you're talking,
Fourth North.
Yeah.
So
Does that make sense, Bill, what I'm trying to?
So if you take 4 units an acre on a single-family development, you're not netting quarter-acre lots.
Right.
You're netting out less than that, including all the roads, so you're closer to 5 units an acre in your net density. And I do think that's a problem between net and gross, understanding what they mean.
Do we all know the development that he was talking about?
So 8 units an acre is what they're
Grant
approving.
Townhomes bill is.
I know where it is.
Okay,
yeah.
okay.
Yeah, I know where it is. So you're saying it's at 10?
It built 10 units, so it's 8 units an acre.
That's what he's saying, it's 8 units per acre.
It was 8, but it worked out.
The five plexes, so there's a total of 10 units, but it was billed at 8 units an acre.
And Bill, you bring up a great point, and I think it would be good for us to work with the commission if we look at density calculations. I think transparency with our residents is really, really important. And I think maybe considering density on net acreage would be something we'd consider, because that's what we actually feel when we walk down a sidewalk or when we drive down a street. We feel net density. We don't feel gross density particularly. So that may be something that we want to address when the time comes.
That's a good point. I think, Corey, can you just clarify to me, he asked for 3 different things. One was the sidewalk, one was the width of the street. Does that impact his ability to put, I mean, is that why he was asking for those things, is so he could accommodate more than 6 units an acre?
I think it would be unfair that it's all solely based on 8 units an acre. Obviously, from a development pro forma, the 8 units an acre plays out a role to it. I think the street width is really where it's affecting his current layout, is the size of the unit, the driveway coming out is short, trying to get the street in, trying to get a decent sized unit. I think his ask for this narrowing of the street is because he'd like a little more flexibility on the footprint of the unit. Because he's doing single story now, that affects it rather than a 2-story. But then I've got to be careful thinking the developer's hat without representing him. You go to 8 units an acre, the single story is going away, and we're going to go to 2 stories, almost guaranteed.
And how many homes in that area are 2-story though? That's a permitted.
Yeah, it's 35 feet, and I think that was the original, because Mr. Morris did receive 8 units an acre in historic past approval, but let that lapse. And those were 2-story units back then, and that was the focal point of the neighborhood, is that all the single-family development behind was only a single story, even though they're zoned for the same height of 35 feet. The historic pattern of the area did not take advantage of that 35 feet historically. And so when you introduced the original project at doing the 35-foot, there was quite a bit of angst from the community, and we had a lot of discussion about where those set in a conditional use process and what the buffer would be under the conditional use. Where under a permitted use, there is no buffer required. So you're getting a little less buffer right now at 6 units an acre if they're 1-story than we got under the conditional use at 2-story, but you traded it off by getting to the single story now versus the 2-story that was previously. So pros and cons with each one.
And Councilwoman Meekum, to your point, when you're talking about my personal experience, my personal experience, I wasn't so disgruntled about the height and massing. It was the setbacks and the buffering. And I think those are extremely important as we think about transition of densities in our cities and transitions of zone, which the general plan addresses. There may be
The
some.
height of that, I mean, like I
there
said,
may be
I was
some
shocked. I didn't know
gaps in
that
the
could
plan.
happen when
Yeah.
I looked out your window. But
And it's happened since, but
I think there is, so to your question, I don't think there are any 2-story homes in that area. That doesn't mean you can't buy a lot and put in a 2-story home, because as you know, if you buy a new lot, you're going to put in the home you want. So I don't think that's, but this is all backyards. There was really no property there. And so you are going in the backyards of all these smaller homes. And the developer has worked, to my understanding, very well with the neighbors, and they're very happy with the 1-story, and they have not, they were okay with some adjustments. That's not the right word. What I want to say. Yeah.
Modifications?
Yeah, modifications to these plans so that, they didn't fight him on some setback adjustments and things, so that the 1-story was much more to the neighborhood's liking and fitting well in with the neighborhood. So I think it's great. And I think Gina was on when that Porter Lane went in, and they brought their attorney in, and the city council. There were planning commissioners with tears in their eyes that day that apologized that they had to do that, and that's why we came. I think Gina and Bill were both on at that time, and they were apologized. The roads were too thin, the sidewalks were on one side, and that's why that's one of the things. I mean, it did bring, I think, better developments to Centerville, because we were able to see the problems with that and some of the things we were letting in. So I definitely would want a long discussion before I would change any of those back again. And when we look at the general plan, we can have those long discussions, but I would not be considering any of these tonight.
I'm going to add to what you're saying there, Robin, in that I don't think that I would be voting in favor of that. I don't think actually, to Spencer, to your comment about the irony of people living in medium density not wanting more medium density, I think that's actually should weigh the other direction. If they're in medium density saying this is not what we want, then I think they've got some dialogue that we will want to have with them to figure out what they're opposed to and why. In terms of like stifling growth or growth in the city, we've approved a number of large high density projects that have just never come to fruition on the west side due to a number of conditions that changed as far as market forces go. But in the whole density conversation, I am happy to have it again. I don't know that I'm necessarily going to be that interested in moving towards packing in every backyard with a new house. We've already got ADUs that have been mandated by the state, which we don't know the impact of what that's going to do to density and parking and utilization of facilities in the city. So I'm hesitant to bump up the numbers before we see what the impact is on the ADUs.
I think one thing I've learned in my 4 years is that the public, it is an education process. And as we go through our general plan, the public sometimes doesn't understand really what they are living in. And I think that's Councilman Summerhay's point, that it's an education process. And I think as we develop this general plan, it is educating them on that, what it is they are living in.
Well, I think to be in fairness, those people love the area that they live in, but they would tell you it probably would be a better development if it didn't have quite so many. I think there's a little bit of cramped and a little bit of that area. So it would be interesting to have them come and tell us, you know, if they think they're too cramped in there for what they have. I think we should go ahead and vote.
But it sounds like we're going to have plenty of time to discuss this. I agree with you. Did you have something on this specific?
I was just gonna say, I hear what you're saying, Robin, and I hear what George is saying. I do kind of, to Spencer's point, want to just say, I wonder, and the mayor's kind of mentioned this as well, that if it is that they are not realizing that they are in a higher density than they realized, that there are, you know, and I think that Spencer's point about, you know, setbacks and some of those other things are probably going to weigh more importantly in how that development feels at the end of the day than just maybe the units per acre. Of course, we want good quality homes that bring, you know, people that are, you know, we want great development that is good places for everyone to live, but I think it's good to let this ride out in the general plan so we can look at all of the areas, because I think your point about, you know, is this the right area for that? You're right, it does go down into that backyard. I think it's good to just let that ride out in the general plan, and I'm sure that's why Planning Commission voted the way they did.
So do we have a motion on this one?
I'll make a motion. I'll make a motion to deny the proposed zoning code amendments as presented in staff report.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Further discussion? Let's go. Robin, it's your turn to start.
Aye.
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 I'll vote aye. I do want to add a footnote that when we talk about growth in the community, one of the things you need to remember is that the decision is emotional as far as the reaction. I don't know that people necessarily care as much about the zone as to the development itself. We saw that significantly when we talked about Symphony Homes, which was actually meeting the low density, but we had packed house of people telling us it was going to be horrible even at 4 units per acre. So just keep in mind that this is going to be an emotional discussion for a lot of people in the community.
Don't disagree.
You're right. Some people thought that was high density. That's correct. Well, that motion passes 5-0.
It's kind of a peculiar motion.
This one we just
It's
passed?
kind of
You have to
backwards.
you have to honor the applicant's request.
No, I understand it.
I know, yeah.
Yeah.
I know.
All right, let's go to item number 6. This is discussion on development of the new cemetery. As we're all aware, there was a ballot proposition in November that on our ballot that passed just by a small margin. As we discuss this, this is not a discussion to discuss The property that we might be looking to purchase or exchange or lease, that would be in a closed session. This is to really discuss what the voters voted for, what the bond says, some projections which have been done financially by our staff in the last couple of weeks, and possibly more. I would turn it over to Brant to see what he may want to fill in what I just said.
Yes, thanks, Mr. Mayor. Yes, the voters approved 52.62% was the margin. I do want to state there was 768 votes or so missing between the mayor and who voted for this. I heard there was some concerns about it was on the backside, so some didn't even get a chance to vote for it. But it was a slim margin, but it is approved, giving you as the council the authority to bond for up to $7 million up to 25 years. Now, if we can keep it below that, $7 million, great. 25 years, that's entirely up to you if you want to shift the 25 to 20 or 15. We do have Nate put together some profitability study. It's in the Novus agenda for you to review to understand some potential projections on what this cemetery could generate as far as revenue outside of the property taxes collected to fund the cemetery. We did choose to go with a kind of an aggressive. Now, our cemetery is 153 years old, and it took us 150 years to sell out. So we're going with a pretty aggressive assumption that we'll sell all these spaces on a 5-acre piece of parcel of land in 50 years. And so that's what our projection is based on, and that's what you see before you. I do suspect we'll see a lot of sales in the first year, and probably tapering off maybe year 5 or 10, it starts to slow down. I'll let Nate go into that detail here in a minute as far as his projections. What's different from the first profitability study shared with you back in October is this is removing perpetual care and the interment costs, because those two items are not directly related to the sale of these spaces. So it's a little more accurate in terms of that. And then we have Michael Higgins here to help address any of the operationals. You've heard Bruce Cox has shared that there's going to need to be at least a 1 FTE, one full-time employee to support this, which has a cost of $65,000 to $80,000 a year just for one employee. Could require more than that, and Michael can discuss that if there's any questions pertaining to the operations of the cemetery. It will potentially require some capital equipment as well. So really what we're looking for as staff is direction. One, are we still interested in pursuing? Just because the voters vote in favor doesn't necessarily mean this council is subject to or must develop a cemetery. And if we do want to go that direction, then some guidance on how we're going to acquire land. Is eminent domain on the table as we find parcels of land? That gives us better direction on how we negotiate or how we start the process, because we do have some regulations we need to follow if that's on the table. So really looking for guidance and really open it up to you as the council to have the conversation and discuss this on the benefits and what direction you'd like to go. So Mr. Mayor, we can, if you want to bring Nate up to discuss that, or we can just open it up first and we get to the profitability study when necessary.
Let's bring up Nate, because when I look at all the other attachments, I think that we have seen all of them before. And this is the newest of the attachments. And we also have, like you said, Michael Higgins here to talk about additional staff that may be needed for that, and maybe what our maintenance costs would be that regard. So Nate, you want to go over your thinking and your logic on the profitability analysis on this?
That'd be great. Keep just pulling it up now. All right, so I'll kind of break this down. I'll let you see my thought process on this. So if we could actually start on the second page of this, kind of go backwards. So on the second page, on the left in that box is our current cemetery fees. The two things I want you to note here are that the right of burial for a single, which is a single plot, is $600. The other thing to note is that currently our perpetual care fee is $300. And then on the right of the box, you can see just a little breakdown of some numbers. 1 acre is 43,560 square feet, and the size of one plot is 40 square feet. Okay, so now if we go back up to the top, in that first chart you see there, we wanted to break down the maximum number of plots that you could have in 1 acre. Now this is the maximum, so 1 acre of land unimpeded by anything, filled to the max. Okay, so in 1 acre, you can have a maximum of 1,089 plots. Now, if selling those plots for $600 would give you a total of $653,400 in revenue if you sold every plot in that acre. And then, just because the perpetual care was brought up last week, I threw in the perpetual care number, but I just want to make sure we're clear that, as we weigh what we can do with this, perpetual care can only be used towards the maintenance of the cemetery. It can't go towards paying any debt. So really what we're looking at, as far as operations and things that we can, paying off debt, we're looking at that, the general fund revenue, the sale of a single plot. And then the rest of that chart, I just did the math for you. So, as we weigh our options, we're looking at a 5-acre cemetery. The maximum is 5,045 or 445 plots. And there's the revenue breakdown. Okay, however, we know that we won't have a cemetery with every possible piece of land being able to go towards plots. So we did a little analysis of our current cemetery and some neighboring cemeteries, and I found that about 25% of the land is used up in infrastructure. Now, infrastructure meaning roads, trees, if you put in any sort of, monument, flagpole, memorial, those type of things, it takes up space that you can use towards plots. And that's about 25% of the space. So the second chart is a more realistic view of what you're looking at in an actual cemetery. So per acre of land, you're looking at about 817 plots, which gives you the total revenue of $490,050 per acre. Okay, and then down below, I have that scenario of a 5-acre cemetery. So if we had a 5-acre cemetery, we know that, as Brant mentioned, we aren't going to sell everything all up front. So while we can look above to see what our total revenue would be if we sold every plot in that cemetery, this scenario kind of breaks down, how long it would take to recoup that cost. Now in this scenario, we had to make a few assumptions. So the first assumption was that we're looking at 5 acres. The other assumption is that we would sell everything within 50 years. As Brant mentioned, we think that's a bit aggressive, but we wanted to use that number just to demonstrate, our possibilities. And then our other assumption is this is a straight line sell. So this is looking at, just taking the total number of plots over 50 years, assuming that we would sell the same number of plots. We know that's probably not going to happen. As Brant mentioned, we'll have that little bit of a curve, but for demonstration purposes, I think this works. So as we do the math on that, we can see that in that little chart below, in 1 year, we would average about 82 plots being sold, which would give you general fund revenue of about $49,000. Following that model over 10 years, you would have 817 plots sold with total revenue from the plot of sales at $490,000. So I wanted to kind of give you that picture, knowing that, with a general obligation bond, the debt will be covered by, through the property tax collection. But as we discussed, being able to possibly pay off the bond early, kind of give you an idea, over 10 years, we might only have about $500,000 available to put towards a bond. Over 20 years, we're looking at, possibly around $1 million, just shy of $1 million. So anyway, do you have any questions about this?
And I will say a lot of this is contingent again upon the policy decided by council. Does the burial space go from $600 to $1,000 per space, or whatever that might be? Again, you could just plug those numbers in here and say, well, it's 82 plots for the first year. That's $82,000 if you went to 1,000, or is it 1,200? And that's going to be decided by you as the council. And then, of course, the other factor would be what kind of policy do we have in terms of is it time of need, or is it do we allow floor space to be purchased by a Centerville City resident right now? We don't care if it's time of need. But just keep in mind, the more we sell, definitely right off the bat, puts us in a situation to rebuild the cemetery sooner than later, if that's our interest to consider that in the future. So those are two big policy changes. This is just one assumption, and you can go anywhere from here on what you'd like to do with the policy to generate that revenue or extend the life of the cemetery. It's entirely up to you.
So to that point, was the model built around on time of need for the 82 and Centerville residents only?
No, I mean, are you talking about how many we sell, Councilmember McEwen, in a year with time of need in our current process?
No, with our projections for the model here, how do we base the sales?
Again, it's just based on that 50 years divided by how many spaces will be available. So it's just a straight line, 82 spaces. We could sell maybe only 20 or 160. This is just trying to assume a 50-year sellout of the entire cemetery.
Okay, thanks for the clarification.
And just to be clear, break even if you average resident, non-resident prices, if you wanted to recoup all of your costs, your base infrastructure costs, not including your FTE or ongoing maintenance or whatever, I'm calculating that to be $1,714. Does that sound right, Nate? On a 5 acre, based off of this model. If you spent $7 million on a 5 acre infrastructure, cemetery infrastructure?
Yeah, so two things on that.
I just took 7 million,
Yeah.
divided it by the number of plots.
In a 4,084 in a 5 acre plot.
I'm just checking my math.
Yeah, I can see what you did. We do estimate that it'll cost about $1 million an acre, is the estimate that Kevin gave us. So 5 acres, we're probably looking about a $5 million cost to build.
Cost to build.
So we're going to purchase
land.
raw land. Now we have to develop it into a cemetery. Put the roads in, the infrastructure.
And I'm not saying how that $7 million is derived, whether it's X percentage of land costs and X percentage of build out costs. Let's just assume that the sum of those equals our $7 million approval from the voters. We'd have to, if we want to break even, we'd have to charge an average of $1,700 a plot.
I mean, the question would be if you sell it out in 50 years and you're breaking even at 1,714, if the numbers are true. I mean, the bond at that point is paid off, right? So that's
Correct.
just revenue, that $7 million potentially
Yes,
built a
it's
new
very
cemetery.
simplistic view. There's no consideration for time value money.
Sure, okay.
Whatever else.
And then I'll also say again, another policy decision is what do you charge a non-resident? Because there's an opportunity to generate revenue to help with this cost. And keep in mind, so $56, a $400,000 home, $56 a year times 25 years is $1,400 is what our current residents are paying. So they're paying $1,000 plus they're paying their $1,400. So just keep that in mind. Yeah. They're paying twice.
On a different file in your packet there, I did put a comparison of other local cemeteries, comparing Bountiful, Farmington's, Kaysville's with ours, just to give you an idea of where their price range is at, just for informational purposes.
I guess as I look at it, one of the places that I at least believe we have made a mistake in the past is we haven't stayed current with our pricing. When you look at your 80, where is it? 80 per acre, or 817 per acre versus 1,000. I don't know, but I suspect there was a significant amount of inadequate planning in the early development of the cemetery, which means that in later years, we don't get the maximum utilization of the space. Now, we're not going to get the whole 1,089, I understand, but I would think we could do better than 817 per acre. I don't know. When you talk about the time frame, we're at someplace between 17 and 18,000 people now. For most of Centerville's life, we were at far less than that, and so I don't know that the 50-year sellout is unrealistic. I'm not sure that it wouldn't peak out significantly shorter than that. I don't know, but those are just, comments and feelings that I have. The other thing is I think that we ought to be doing everything that we can to push for double depth, which probably doesn't double the revenue, but significantly increases the revenue.
That becomes a feature of where you
Where
get
it
land.
is. Yeah. that's
Even,
right.
even at 100%, I don't want to cut you off.
No,
Are you
no.
still-
We're just discussing, so please cut off.
Yeah, even at 100%, you're still at 918 per acre. Is that what I'm saying? Even if there weren't 25% for infrastructure, roads, trees,
Sure.
you're
Yeah,
still at
that's about right.
918 per acre.
Yeah.
Well, those also are factors of, those are casket burials, right? So that you could increase density depending on the shift culturally towards more people wanting to be interred as cremated.
That's true.
And I agree with all of what Bill said. And the other thing is, 1,700 might look like a lot for a plot right now, but we're looking at 50 years from now. So, I mean, up here at our cemetery, they used to only be $50, and then they were $100. I mean, they were less than $50. So in 50 years from now, those plots might be selling for $5,000 or $2,000 without that being, and the way we're seeing inflation go. I mean, I don't think we can say this is what it's gonna pencil out. Every council, and I've watched it through the years, where it was anybody can have a plot up here, and then it was only Centerville residents can have a plot up here, and then only at the time of need can have a plot up here. So every council has done something a little different, and as it's filled in, they've had to do other things. But the prices have changed too. I think at $600 we're pretty low. Our niche wall is 700, and so I think that 600 is low. I think if we had to go up at 12 or 1,300 to start with, but yet as the years go, the price is going to go up, and I'm hoping that any council that's here is going to keep up with it more inflation than what was kept up with in the years before. And then I'm like with Bill, I think we've got a whole lot more people here to be buried than there were back in 1873. So it's going to fill in a lot faster, and that's where the hard question is, do we want some revenue to help pay it off, or do we want it to leave for the people for 50 years? Because in 50 years, there's not going to be any more land for them to buy a cemetery for than we have right now. So,
Right.
I mean, I really wished I was at a council meeting where the piece of property below the cemetery was for sale for just hundreds of thousands of dollars. And, I remember leaving that night thinking, oh, and I wish they'd purchased it. I mean, what it would have done for the city. So I think what we do now is going to help. I don't know. If you're asking me, I think the citizens voted for it. I would like to see us pursue trying to find the property. I would like to see us to see what we can find available without having to go to eminent domain. I don't want to.
What was the last thing you said, Robert?
I would like to see what we can find without having to go to eminent domain.
Okay.
I think that ought to be our last card on the table. So I think you need to, I think we ought to authorize city staff to go out and find out, approach some people and let them know that we can pay market value for their property, and they could be the heroes of Centerville, because as being on the council, that's probably one of the top 3 issues that I have had brought to my attention is cemetery place.
I think part of why I found one of the profitability analysis is done is yeah, and there's granted some things. This is assuming just all burials. This is assuming, just going on price that it costs to recoup the bond. I just want to be honest with the citizens, saying that the $5 million that's spent, it may not be all recouped through plot sales. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we're talking about is, that's why I kind of did this break-even analysis is, hey, look, if you don't charge that much, never mind the fact that what Brant said is you're really paying twice, because you're going to have to pay, if you want to break even, $1,700 for a plot, plus you paid for 25 years another $56, a year, and so the total essentially doubles it. That's break even. If you vary from that, then you're essentially, you've created an amenity for our city that we've all contributed to and we've lost money on. I think that's your point, Mayor.
Right. And granted, there's things that we do where that we don't recoup.
Correct. And I think that's part of the discussion. And to your point, I don't disagree at all and agree with Robin on many points. Is I think the public entrusted us as a council during the election to say, you know what, yes, I'm going to trust you and I'm going to agree to this bond on a slim measure. We're not even sure how many people didn't vote because they didn't turn over the back of it, but we're trusting you that you're going to make a good decision based on what we've been represented so far, which wasn't a lot of information, because we weren't told, hey, well, you're probably going to have to hire another FTE, which is going to be another 65 to 80 grand a year. We weren't told the eminent domain. If we had said eminent domain on the ballot proposition, would it have passed? I don't think anybody would have voted to impose that on their neighbor. So now you're adding in these wrinkles that weren't on the ballot to say, hey, we got to hire an FTE, we got to possibly exercise eminent domain. Oh, by the way, we also have other infrastructure needs throughout our city that we're going to have to figure out in terms of prioritization of capital needs beyond all of these things. So those are the wrinkles as part of it. I voted for the cemetery bond, but I think the public voted also trusting that we'd work through the details in a smart way.
If I could just interject, I would share that the revenue generated, as you're talking about break even or what the case might be, you do have a revenue source, and I think this is the first time, particularly in this state, a GO bond has been passed for a cemetery, which is unheard of, right? So there's something to be said about the residents voting, the voters voting in favor of a cemetery using a GO bond. However, keep in mind, as staff, or at least I'm speaking on behalf of myself, the revenues that are collected, when you're talking about the $49,000 a year, that is going to be paying for that FTE or any other operational costs, not going back to paying off the bond. Because if we have to hire 1 to 2 more people with capital equipment costs, if we don't have a revenue source coming in, we're going to have to increase property taxes again just to hire the personnel to maintain the cemetery. So keep that in mind, that these revenues, as we go through, might go to support the operation of the cemetery and not necessarily repaying the bond. So again, just another thought to consider as you're debating this.
Yeah, so
let me just throw out a point here that I really want to hit home on this one. I'm hearing it several times in different ways. Bryant said it, Spencer said it, the mayor said it. In a democracy, majority vote by 1 is a pass. It isn't, it's a pass, sort of, it's a pass. The people have voted for this, and we need to honor what the people have asked us to do. And in terms of, we had lots of discussions about eminent domain, and Robin was kind of the champion of trying to make sure all that information was in the same packet, if you will, and we had to make sure that it was bifurcated correctly because eminent domain has nothing to do with bond issuance. And we have the bonding authority anyway. We can go out right now without the vote of the people and go get a bond for a cemetery. The reason we went out for a bond is we wanted the support of the community, and they gave it to us. I'm really getting kind of irritated at this. Well, it's a slim margin, therefore we might override them. Either we're a democracy or we're not. And if we're going to be a democracy, we honor the votes of the people, because when you do the other way, it smacks of a totalitarian regime that only plays along as long as they want to. So we need to honor what the people have told us they want done.
And I agree with that, Councilman, but they also came to the open house and they wanted information such as, what's it gonna cost? What's the plot? Where are they gonna be? All this sort of thing. Yes, they did vote and give us the authority to spend that money on a cemetery, but they also wanted more information as well too. And I'm not so sure that they got all the information that they should have got. But they did vote for it. You are correct in that they did pass it.
Well, I think
So your comment there, Mayor, are you saying they did not receive the legal requirements for the bond as far as the information that's required for the ballot? Because I thought we had bond counsel give us everything that we needed to give them for that purpose.
No, George, if I can interrupt, George, I don't think he's saying that at all. What he's saying is there were a lot of people, and I had a number of people tell me that they voted against it because there wasn't enough information given. When I explained and answered some questions and things that we knew, they said, oh, I'd have voted for it if I'd known that. Part of the problem is that we were a little slow in getting our information out in the first place. We didn't get a great attendance at the open house, and so we didn't have as much information out there as people would like to have. Did we have what needed to be there? I believe we did, and we got the vote. But, you know, if you talk to people, they'd like more information.
And some of the
I'm not disputing that they'd want more information. I think that we have to be very careful about what information is required for the bond versus as we're having here is this is a total cost of ownership discussion, which is separate from the ballot issue.
Correct.
Councilmember Keown, I appreciate your comments, and I'm not saying I'm opposed to it, and the slim margins challenge whether we should proceed. All we're trying to do at this point from a staff perspective is understand and make sure the numbers are realistic as you go out speaking to community members, understanding what is the true cost, as you stated, true cost of ownership. So as you're making the decision, we're not saying, no, don't go forward with it as staff. We're saying this is kind of the expectation, and understand that as you're meeting with residents. Does their tune change based on this new information? I don't know, but that's why we're here, is for you to debate and discuss how you'd like to proceed, and staff, we're going to go and do.
I think that,
And Brent, I'm not sorry, Robin. Brent, I'm not trying to say that staff is trying to talk us out of it or I'm not trying to attack you individually. I just really think it's very dangerous in a democracy when you start doubting the vote. And even if it's one, it's still the will of the people. And that's where I just think that the dialogue rings kind of sour to me, because we've seen that happen with ballot initiatives at the state level, where the state will immediately ignore the will of the people and do what they want to do. And there's a lot of discontent with the state legislators every time they do that. I don't want that at the city level. I want people to understand if they make the time and effort to vote, that we will respect their wishes, especially when we're asking for their opinion.
And the will of the people is important. That's why you'll see halfway down on the attachment, the 6 or 7 items that I worked on for months and months and months, because the people did want a cemetery, trying to bring it to the cemetery to them at a lower cost. So we're just discussing the realities of what the cemetery is going to cost, you know.
but we're still there. We don't know what the reality is until we go look and talk to some people.
That's right.
Find some ground.
That's
And so
right.
I think that's what staff wants us to direct them is, yes, we would like you to find some grounds that were possibilities. Yes, we would like to know the cost of those grounds, so that we couldn't give the people, that's people called me, where are you gonna put the cemetery? Well, I don't know. Are you gonna put it in Centerville? Yes. If we get one, I'm gonna put it in Centerville, but I don't know where. I know a couple possible places, but that isn't my prerogative to let out right now. You know, the questions that were asked. And so some of those questions we couldn't answer, and you still haven't answered them for us. So that's what we, I would think as a council, we would direct you is to go out, see what you can find, and come back with a price. I'm not sure that I can vote for eminent domain, I'll be really honest.
Sure. So ideally, it would be great if we had a community member, property owner say, I saw this passed and I have a piece of property just right for you, right? That's ideal. And we pay fair market value for it. The challenge is, Lisa or myself are not experts in land acquisition, right? An eminent domain, if that is, and this is a big deal for us to understand, if that's on the table, because how we approach a property owner, even informally, there are certain check boxes we need to check. And if we don't state that we're interested in eminent domain, does that process fly out the window? And that's not even an option. So I'd love to have the informal conversations with a number of property owners. I think there's 2 or 3 properties that of interest, and we'd like to engage those property owners. But if the interest of the council is saying, yes, eminent domain, if they're unwilling for certain parcels, then that changes that conversation, and I would suggest we engage a right-of-way or land acquisition agent who works with UDOT, who has expert in these check boxes to help us negotiate or navigate through these complicated process.
My opinion on eminent domain is I'm not okay with it. We're talking about an optional item. I know it's the will of the people and I know that they want it, but I am not comfortable forcing someone to sell their property for a cemetery. I think that if it was a road or something like that that is an absolute need, that's in my mind slightly different than something that is, yes, our people want it and I support that and want to move forward with it, but I think we need to find a voluntary seller.
To a very great degree, I think most of us, you've expressed it. I don't know what Spencer would feel. I know what Robin and George feel, with one caveat, and that is if we find a viable piece of property that somebody is willing to sell and they are a willing seller and we are a willing buyer, but to get the deal done, a small piece of eminent domain is required in order to get access through to the property. That then to me is a different question
Fair enough.
as opposed to, oh, I'm going to go claim eminent domain on a 5-acre piece. So
And
I'm
at
not willing
that
to reject
point-
it completely, but it would be very low on the list.
I hear what you're saying. I think that's a really good point to bring up, and I agree with you that maybe that in that case, that's different, but that's likely a different landowner, at which point I guess then you can proceed appropriately as far as eminent domain goes if there was a piece that was needed to construct access, say a road or otherwise.
Well, there could even be parcels, let's say there's 3 or 2 property owners willing to sell their property. Now, there's a house on it, but let's say there's a middle party that's unwilling to sell. Is council willing to eminent domain that parcel to give you a contiguous type cemetery? I mean, they're definitely, but that's a different property owner, so we're engaging that property owner differently at that time. Now, again, I wouldn't necessarily suggest we pursue, at least first, with properties that have homes on them, because homes are expensive here in Centerville, and that would definitely drive up the cost because you're buying a home to demolish it. But there are options out there that we could consider. But anyway.
I appreciate Councilman Ince's insight. It's very perceptive in terms of the eminent domain discussion, because you said you don't know how I feel. I'm not a proponent of eminent domain on a large parcel of ground. If we had, and I don't disagree with what Councilman McEwen is saying, but the vote was for a bond. It didn't give us specifics. And so our role now is to use our legislative authority to say, okay, what does that mean? And I agree that if there was a parcel of ground in the city in which we didn't have to exercise eminent domain, or for heaven's forbid, there might be a small sliver that we have to consider, I might be persuaded to that. I am generally opposed to eminent domain. That was never presented in the open house. I don't think the public ever considered that.
Oh, no, they did.
I had lots of people call me about it.
They asked
No,
us
no
about
one
it.
did to me,
Sure,
so.
but you weren't on the council at the time, so that's.
Correct,
why.
exactly. So I wasn't privy to any of that. But as a member of the public, had I been told that and people asked me about it, I'd be, boy, do you want somebody to come in and take
Sure.
your ground?
Right.
I would think we'd have some serious opposition.
Yeah, I agree.
But I agree with your perceptive, nuanced point, Bill, that if there's a large parcel of ground that works for a cemetery, and there has to be some eminent domain that doesn't, and it's all in the eye of the beholder, but we feel isn't going to unduly punish them, then I think I possibly could get behind that. I'll give a lot of caveats there, because I think it's a very sensitive topic on every level.
So let me come out on the other side of that argument. I don't see any difference between eminent domain for a road and for a cemetery. There are public facilities that are necessary for supporting the people. And I think one of the things that needs to weigh into our discussion when we talk about eminent domain is if you are faced with a suboptimal piece of property that you can buy without eminent domain, and it costs the bulk of your funds to mitigate whatever's on that property and turn it into the appropriate parcel to provide the service of a cemetery, did you exercise the appropriate fiduciary duty for the citizens and their taxpayer funds? Now, eminent domain, yeah, it has some negativity associated with it because of the fact that you are asking an individual to cede the rights of their property. But on the flip side, if you're talking about a 5-acre parcel in Centerville right now at the going rate, you're forcing somebody to become a multimillionaire. I don't necessarily see that as a huge negative, but what I do see is that in Centerville right now, I don't think realistically you're going to find 5 contiguous acres that are optimal for our purposes without the use of eminent domain.
And I can see that point as well, too. I don't know that I see the point of, just because you force somebody to become a multimillionaire, that's necessarily what they want, because not everybody cares to become a multimillionaire, or they already are, or they have different things that they want to do with that land. I mean, that's not the number one thing in everybody's mind of hey, I want to become a multimillionaire off this property.
And I'm not suggesting either that I'm a proponent of a suboptimal parcel just because.
Well, I think it's an interesting discussion. I think as we have to come to some sort of conclusion on the eminent domain piece in terms of how staff can engage, because if they engage a property owner incorrectly and we lose right to eminent domain, then we might as well say it's academic and park it for a future council to rebond again, because we're facing interest rate hikes coming up. It's already being signaled by all the analysts. Our money is losing value and we're dealing with the highest inflation in decades. So I'm concerned that what we actually have now in the pot to build this cemetery is eroding daily and it's going to get worse.
Councilmember McEwen does have a good point. I mean, that's definitely a concern, and I have reached out to Marcus Keller, our representative from Zions, regarding that. Now, tax-exempt bonds are not going to increase as much as the non-tax exempt bonds, the private bonds. However, I mean, it is a concern. We'll see some price hikes, but his opinion is we won't see drastic increases. But to Councilor McEwen's point on inflation, that's definitely our greatest enemy right now. Just to give you an idea, December to December inflation for the western region was 7.1%, 8.4% for the mountain region, and 7% across the nation. So, and it's only, I project, going to go up from here, right? So that is definitely our greatest enemy, and timing is critical in how we engage and proceed.
Any more thoughts? I mean, I would say then, I mean, you're kind of hearing pretty loud and clear that can we acquire property without eminent domain on the whole piece of property? If there has to be a slice or that type of thing, I mean, Councilman McEwen brings up a good point. If you don't have that card right out of the gate, do you lose that possibility? I mean, they're all valid points.
There is one other thing that I would like to throw into the mix in the discussion, and thank you, Nate, for the package that you put together. The one other thing that I would like to throw out for consideration is that we not bind ourselves to the municipal burial rights. I'd like to see a comparison of what the commercial ones are in the area, and if we're the city that has the highest burial fee, so be it. So I'd just like to see that. Pardon?
I said, at least we have somewhere.
So I'd like to see what, have it someplace and I didn't see
You
it.
probably wouldn't have to buy as much acreage, you know, but who knows how people are going to react.
Well, I think part of this is the desire to be able to be buried in a town that, a
Right.
city that people call home.
Yeah,
And if you really feel that way, then you're willing to pay for that. And, from a personal
Good point.
standpoint, I feel that's important.
good point.
And that's why I supported the bond bill. Really, it came down to community. If you
Right.
choose to live in Centerville and raise your family here and love the community that Centerville is, then you would be supportive of the general idea of coming back to memorialize your, you know, your ancestors here as well.
Right.
Really good point.
So I think another area we need to help staff in is Brandon said that he and Lisa aren't necessarily professionals on land acquisition. Thoughts on the process that we go to help them out in that regard?
I personally cannot help with that, but we could probably have my husband Matt weigh in on who might be some people to talk to. He does a lot of right-of-way type stuff with UDOT, so he may be able to recommend some people you could.
We have a list. So Kevin, our city engineer, works with a lot of UDOT acquisition.
Yes,
And
he does.
so a number out there. And I'll share, in a previous city I worked for, we had some challenges engaging neighboring property owners around the airport, and they just didn't want to work with the city. And so we engaged a consultant to help acquire the land around the airport, because we had homes going up right next door to our airport, which was a safety issue for us. Eminent domain, because it was out in the county, wasn't necessarily an option, but once we engaged a contractor consultant to assist, the process was much smoother, because they understand the conversations, and they're not directly working with the city, if I dare say that. But I do feel like it went much better by engaging a consultant.
Bill, you were throwing out some parameters on eminent domain. Maybe that'll help staff, because I don't have a problem eminent domaining the entire parcel if necessary, but it sounds like you have some parameters you want them to work within.
That's what I've been hearing.
So Brand, are you asking how much eminent domain is the council comfortable with? George has said he's comfortable with the entire parcel. Is that the question? And, or are there other questions? So I guess, are you also asking, hey, are we okay to engage a consultant as well?
That as well. I mean, the default is always being on the safe side. Very risk-averse person, so engaging a consultant and just going through the process to not eliminate eminent domain, but if you have someone that's a little bit more educated, understands the process, it may not come as crossed as too brash, or, they understand how to negotiate and work with. I'd like to leave it on the table. I'm not saying eliminate it completely, but I think there's benefits of leaving eminent domain on the table, because there might be some complications. So if we just engage in a consultant and go through the process with some assumption on the back end, I think it would help the process go much smoother. Now, but again, that's not our default. That's a very last case, and that would be coming back saying, okay, are you ready to pull the trigger? And that would be another decision this council has to make, it's saying, yes, pull the trigger. But
Do we have any idea how much that consultant might cost us?
Anywhere from $5 to $10,000. We haven't. I think it would be great if we did an
Not
RFP.
$5.
So I think it would be great. We do have a list of 6 individuals who might be willing to help, and I'd like to do essentially an informal RFP to see what those services might be. But
I
haven't
think,
engaged
Brian, before we engage a consultant in that, cost arena, I think we need to be very clear about what our expectations are with eminent domain, because if eminent domain is a walkway or something, I don't want to engage a consultant at a high price to provide us a full litany of how we can use eminent domain if there's no desire to use it.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you.
I can appreciate what Brant's saying about the risk. I think it's probably better to, you can always put an RFP out if the costs are just beyond what we want to bear. You can always put a statement in that we have the right of refusal.
I would like to suggest that we table the question until the next council meeting and resume the discussion. I'd like the opportunity to think about what's been said, maybe have some one-on-one discussions. And something I did not do as I prepared for tonight's meeting was have myself in a position of recommending an approach. So that would be my suggestion. I don't think we need to come to a conclusion tonight. I think we table it and have this discussion continue in 2 weeks.
Councilman Rentz, I'll come prepared with an idea of costs on those potential consultants.
That would be great.
And each one of you obviously need to think, and even if you have to do some inquiring of consultants, I mean, how much eminent domain you're willing to go. I mean, I don't know the answer to that. None of us have ever done it.
Hopefully,
Might not.
hopefully, my hope is 0.
Yeah, my hope is zero.
I agree with Councilman Mintz. No, I agree with him on that front, but also tabling it till our next meeting.
I agree
Okay.
also.
I think it's just too big of an issue to say.
Okay, I think it's been a good discussion.
Been great discussion. Thank you.
Everybody has had wonderful inputs. I think we've gotten much out on the table. Is there anything that we have missed that anybody can think of that they would like council to consider or staff to consider?
The only thing I would say, and this again gets to my earlier point of the public not quite knowing, I think we all say the cemetery or no, and what George is saying is, hey, we're a democracy, we said yes, but there is also not a full vetting of information for the public. We got a ballot that said, are we authorizing the city council to spend money? The one thing that I'd ask staff to look at is prioritization of capital infrastructure needs for the next 5, 10, 15 years. Are we looking at opportunity costs as it relates to any expansion, physical facility expansions on City Hall, a police department? I was looking, again, I wasn't part of city council, but looking back at the meeting minutes, Chief Child says we need a new standalone police station. So to know what else is out there in the future as we consider this, I think it's important not to make a decision in the vacuum of, hey, we're only talking about the cemetery, because we're actually making a decision that ripples across our expenses.
True,
as a
except
city.
the bond can only be used as a cemetery.
Right, but then if you have other infrastructure needs in the future, then you're asking your public, oh, by the way, hey, you have to pay $56 more a year in your taxes, but we also have to do this. And so one of your constituents comes back and says, Robin, what on earth were you doing? You didn't tell me about the police station. I now have to pay taxes for that too? Good gracious. I think that's kind of what would be helpful from a council standpoint.
Very appropriate.
To look out into the future.
And if I could just make one comment, I know the eminent domain question has sort of dominated the conversation tonight. As you think about this over the next 2 weeks, I do think it's problematic to make this decision in a vacuum. I was going to say that anyway. just in terms of eminent domain. We haven't looked at properties yet. You know, I don't think you're going to be able to answer this question until you have all the facts of what kind of properties are out there. All we're saying from staff is we recommend, whether you use eminent domain or not, which in my opinion is a decision further down the road, that you hire a consultant that's going to help us be objective and far more successful in purchasing a very expensive piece of property. And then they can also help us say, this is so much better, it's going to cost you half the price to develop. You know, I just think you don't have all the facts yet to really answer this week or next week. We're just saying
Sure.
it's advised. Because there are some steps that we have to take, whether we do that or not.
Lisa, thanks for those comments. I think one of the things I'd like from staff as well is, as we go through this process, we need rules of engagement for the public. I don't want to do anything that conflicts us out from being able to use any of the rights and privileges or making soft offers or anything like that prejudice the process. So I would like to get some, I guess that would be legal counsel from you and maybe from one of these consultants on how we do this correctly.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Good comments, good discussion. Let's move forward with that a couple weeks down the road. All right, let's go to item number 7, Justice Court staffing, discussion of Justice Court staffing. Thank you, Michael, for being here. If you have input in the next couple of weeks, we'd love to hear it, okay? All righty.
You don't need to go away mad.
Justice Court staffing, is Jake going to discuss this? He's not here, is he? So Brent, are you going to do it?
He's on.
Oh, there's Jake. Sorry, Jake.
I'm right here. Yeah, so as we discussed at the last council meeting, court's been going through quite a few changes in the last 5 or so years, resulting in a reduction in the amount of work that they need to do, mainly going paperless. They've been reducing how much they need to send in the mail. And because of this, we've begun to reduce the number of staff in court. Right now, we have 1 full-time supervisor and we have 2 part-time clerks. The issue has been that one of these positions, the part-time position, has been difficult to fill. We've had several employees come and go in that, and it's been burdensome on our supervisor in having to take that extra time to train that individual. It takes about 6 months to get one of those individuals to the point where they can work on their own. This creates another burden on our supervisor as well, where she's not able to take time off as much as she should anyway. We've done a few things to help with that. We've reduced the number of hours that the actual counter is open so that there's some flexibility before and after 9 and 3 p.m. for her to be able to take time off and to train new employees. So, what I'm asking for, like I did before, is that we can take 1 part-time position and increase it from about 24 hours a week to full-time, 40 hours. And the other part-time position, actually reduce that to about 8 hours per week. So there's actually a net decrease in the number of hours worked that I'm asking for within court. Now, the cost for this, right now, it's about $220,000 a year to staff the Justice Court, all of which is paid for out of court revenues, which are commingled with the general fund. Doing this conversion obviously means that we will have an employee that is eligible for benefits. So there's an additional cost there. If this individual were to take the full benefits, it costs about $20,000 more a year. This year, it's probably going to be about $8,000. So I asked for some, informal approval so we could proceed with the recruitment process. And so you know how that went. We actually had several very good applicants with prior court experience. We have not had that in any of these pools that we've had in the past. We've interviewed a couple of them, and they're eager to work. Yeah, go for it.
Is that because you were looking for full-time versus part-time?
Yeah, well, I'm assuming so, yes.
Okay.
Because these are full-time prior clerks that are continuing to look for another full-time position.
Thank you, sorry.
Yeah, no, that's fine. So the pool looks good. And so I'm asking for this evening, the formal approval of the council to go ahead and change this position from 24 hours to a 40-hour benefited employee, and reducing the other one from the 24 hours to about 8. Mainly, this individual will be here to help staff on court days on Thursdays.
To add to that, thanks, Jacob, is the court will continue to be profitable in the revenues. This isn't a huge decrease. Over the last 4 years, the revenue for the court has been anywhere from $160,000 to $240,000. So COVID definitely took a hit. I think it dropped down to $80,000, Jacob. I don't know if you remember last year. But revenues continue to be strong in the court. Now, in 2 years, if the Justice Court Reform Task Force recommends a kind of a change in how we do Justice Court, that'll be a different discussion in 2 years. But for right now, we feel this is the best direction for the court, with a very minimal increase to make it far more efficient.
So, but from an overall cost perspective, the court is cash positive, but overall it still adds another $21,000, correct? On
That's
an
correct.
annual basis.
That's correct. So a lot of those funds, again, go to the public safety. It goes to the general fund, which is commingled, but we look at it as it's supporting public safety and supporting our officers as they're going out there.
And where does
Yeah,
that
when the
that
time
budget come from? How are we going to cover that?
The 20,000.
Yeah.
So currently this year will need to come from. It'll be at $8,000, Jacob, impact for
Yeah.
this fiscal year. So very minor.
They have a piece of capital equipment they were scheduling, but they haven't had any issues with it, so they would forego that purchase. So yes, we are putting that. Yeah, the copy machine.
We really have had a lot of trouble with people. We can't keep anybody.
Right, no, I don't, I'm supportive of it generally. I'm just trying to think, okay, things cost, so how do we pay for it?
Out of your salary? I'm just kidding. I'm kidding.
Just trying to discuss realities.
Right, and I do want to add that I did add to the packet about a couple hours ago an email from Judge Miller, who supports this and is pretty excited about this opportunity to get a more efficient court and have a full-time. Over the years, I've found that, to be honest with you, full-time employees just seem more engaging and more productive. They're part of the culture of a city, and not just coming in, putting in 4 hours. I'm not accusing our part-timers of doing that, but I am saying I feel like you get better productivity and more investment in a city, and so I like the idea of transitioning one of them to a full-time.
I'm not opposed to it. What do you need from us? Just a staff direction?
Yeah, just a formal approval.
I'd make a motion that we approve staff proceeding with the Justice Court staffing changes as outlined.
Second.
Motion second. You want a roll call vote, Lisa, or can I take it? Okay. Roll call vote. Councilwoman Meekum.
Aye.
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 That motion passes 5-0. Let's go to item number 8.
Thank you, council. Appreciate it.
Oh, thank you, Jake. Appreciate you being here. Extension of emergency paid sick leave for COVID-19 related leave. Brent?
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. As of July, back in, I don't remember when we first approved it, when COVID first started. April of 2020, we approved the emergency FMLA that was in the CARES Act that essentially asked or required us as employers to provide up to 80 hours of leave outside of the normal accrued leave, vacation, and in our case, all-purpose leave. So we had that provision available that if anybody tested positive for COVID, they could tap into this up to 80 hours, 2 full weeks, as they recover from the symptoms, wherever the case might be. We extended it for 6 months, which expired in July. And so we have not had that access to those hours for our employees. We've had a number of employees since July test positive for COVID. They've been using all-purpose leave, in some cases, long-term disability or long-term sick, which was not necessarily allowed. We need to change that. That's a totally different conversation. But what we'd like to do is go back and reinstate the 80 hours currently. We have 5 employees currently out with COVID, tested positive. Again, nothing has been transmitted from employee to employee as far as I'm aware. It's just something coming from home, particularly school-aged kids, where they are home and some of our employees are running out of all-purpose leave. And so we'd like to reinstate the 80 hours. We understand it's 5 days is the recommended isolation quarantine period, so 40 hours. But I would still ask that we ask for the 80 hours if there's any sort of complications or any issues, that there's some administrative authority to approve up to 80 hours. And also, in addition to that, retro this back to July, look at those employees who have confirmed, documented positive COVID, and we'd like to switch over the hours and reinstate some of their all-purpose leave. But I'll be honest, our employees have done a phenomenal job. They're dedicated. Even those who have tested positive are 5. They're currently, for the most part, working from home and isolated. They know they have work to do and they don't want to fall behind. But we keep them busy at home, whether it's training, anything like that. But we do keep our employees busy, and they choose to. So not a lot of people are taking advantage of this leave, but we'd like to have it available for those that have some serious symptoms that we could tap into, that we'd like to be able to provide to them. So that's what we're bringing before you today, is an extension of that policy.
Brent, do you have any viewpoint on vaccination status relative to the use of the benefit?
We have discussed that. So the OSHA that was just struck down by the Supreme Court, I actually really like some of the guidelines in that policy, asking for a vaccination status, testing negative before returning to work, things like that. The challenge, of course, right now, before I liked this policy, we can't get test kits now, right? So one of the labs has a breakout and they're 6 to 8 weeks behind. We had access to South Davis Fire as employees to get free testing, so we didn't have to wait in line for a couple hours. Chief Stone just sent an email that says we're no longer have access to that, only public safety employees due to the shortage. So that does create some challenges, but we have discussed the possibility of asking the vaccination status and then differing type of requirements to return to work. Here's Lisa.
Yeah, I think we did think about the vaccination status, because I do think in July, when we allowed, July 2021 was the expiration of our initial extension. It was a voluntary extension because the federal regs expired in December 2020. But in July 2021, we were thinking, yeah, let's incentivize employees to get vaccinated. But now even people that are vaccinated are getting the Omicron variant. And so there was some discussion about, because we have as many employees out now as we did at the past peak. So it is, I understand the difficulty of also proposing the retroactive, but again, I think in terms of our recommendation, it was trying to be fair and keeping it as simple and equitable as possible, which sort of took out the vaccination incentive. But again, I think that, well, in terms of our numbers, a lot of our employees are vaccinated, so that's not as much of an incentive at this point. But those are just my comments. I'm not trying to make any scientific statements.
Brent, just a quick question. So if I read paragraph 1D, it states that if they use the 80 hours, they're not eligible for any more, correct? Correct. But the 80 hours is in addition to what they already have. So is that correct?
No, the idea of this is, and this is similar language when we did the voluntary, from April 2020 to December 2022, you get 80 hours. So in that whole period. So if you've already used your 80 hours and you happen to get it again, you're not eligible for another 80. If you only had 2 days, because I think, again, not all employees, few employees were using all 80 hours because they're, again, if you can work from home, you're not taking any leave and you're not eligible.
Correct.
So that's...
I just wanted to make sure I understood let's say the pre-pandemic policy. Is this in addition to what we had before, like is an additive.
It's just a continued extension of the ability to use it, and then also filling the gap from July 2021 to now. But 80 hours, every employee would only be eligible for 80 hours for that entire year.
So if somebody's used their 80 hours, this won't affect them.
But we're only talking about COVID hours.
Right.
They've also got their other sick.
That's kind of what I was getting at. Is I'm just trying to understand.
This is essentially looking at it.
Sick leave. I'm an independent contractor, so I don't understand the concept of sick leave.
Essentially, we're looking at this as administrative leave, right? That's another way of looking at it. This administrative leave outside of your normally accrued vacation, sick leave, and all that you do accrue. So it's outside of that.
My second question, this is not a political question. This is just a genuine, sincere question. Of the employees that have recently had COVID, do we know how many of them have been fully vaxxed plus boosted? Do we know that at all?
No. So.
That's right, I can hear you. Maybe
Well, I got it.
For the men.
George or the public can't, I guess.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, there you go.
So when we did back in, I don't know, it seems so long ago now. So a year and a half ago, it was a year ago when mask mandates were, the state had said no more mask mandates. The question was asked to employees, are you vaccinated? Because we determined you can ask that question. We only had at the time 3 employees who weren't vaccinated. Now, as far as the booster, we just haven't followed up on it. We're just, because we haven't had this policy, so there was necessarily not that need. And we have not had very many positive tests even since July. We have not had many. We've had a number of people out because they had thought they might have COVID, but they find out they don't. So again, those people won't be able to access this 80 hours. Those that have a positive test will be able to access these hours to go back.
I'm not trying to
Sure.
preclude anybody from, I'm just trying to figure out the landscape
Sure.
of the decision process. Okay.
So one of the issues that I have with this policy, and this is going to ring weird for a lot of people, is we are on the cusp of moving from pandemic to endemic with the behavior patterns and the lack of masking and the overturning of mask mandates and the raging numbers of Omicron we have in the state of Utah. So since it's now moving in that direction, why would we create a special classification when basically if you haven't had COVID with the way things are going, you're likely to be exposed or get it soon?
So I will say, just because of how many people we have out right now, it's a great question, Councilor McEwen, and why would we do that? We're open to reducing this to even just the end of June, right? Just keep it 6 months, 5 to 6 months. Really, what we're trying to do is just get through this peak. We have a number of employees out. We have seasoned veterans who have a pretty good bank of all-purpose leave, but now are using all of that. And so we're trying to give them some sort of parachute to help them through at least this peak, right? We're seeing the hot spots slowly. They've hit their peaks, and so we anticipate Utah will do the same, but until we get there, we're asking for an extension to be able to tap into these hours until we're through that peak.
But does that impact us for the next variant that comes along? Because Omicron won't be the end of this.
It's a great question, Councilor McEwen. So would you like to tell us what you think, where this is going to go?
Sure, I'll give you a non-scientific reading most of the dashboard's answer. The answer is it's going to continue, is moving to endemic. It'll become like instead of having a flu season, it's going to be perpetual, and you'll have variants. So I'm struggling with what the new normal needs to be, and if the new normal is that we feel we need to carve out 80 hours for COVID strains, do we set that precedence now for additional items that come along, bird flu, otherwise, or do we say that this is now part of our society and it's the risks of going around in a free and open society?
I'll say my answer to that, Councilor McEwen, is when the state stops sending me updates of how many COVID cases we have on a daily and people aren't in line for 3 hours to get tested because they're required to. When we stop doing that, then I think we've reached flu, right?
We can take care of the email one pretty quick. I'll just make a phone call for you.
Thanks, appreciate that.
So are you suggesting, Councilman McEwen, that we look to do it only through June and then do an extension if need be, or?
I'm just throwing it out there for the general discussion of the council. The situation on the ground is not going to change significantly. If we're going to create this special classification for ongoing COVID, do we ever sunset it, or do we just accept that COVID is now going to be part of our reality going forward, and we have to adjust our policies accordingly so that we're not carving this out to be special anymore? I mean, Brant's comment that he just made indicates that it's still special enough. So I'm just throwing that out for general discussion.
I like that idea of June. I was a little taken back by December 2022. I had to double take on the dates.
Yeah, me too.
Thinking that was, oh, that's the end of this year that we're in now. So I would be supportive of that suggestion, George.
Maybe, I guess the suggestion you could just do June 30th so we could go through the fiscal year.
That's why I mentioned June.
That's a good idea.
Okay, any further discussion? We have a motion on that.
I've got a couple of questions. I'm in the same boat you are. That is, I'm an independent contractor. I just live with what I live with. I have an executive assistant who recently came through COVID. She did what she could, worked most of the way through. She's been working from home for months. George, has the state done something like this?
No, state employees are required to use their own leave.
And if they run out of their own leave, they're just out of luck?
Or they could apply for the leave bank. There are ways to kind of plug that hole, but no, they're required to use their own personal leave.
My follow-up question to that, Councilor McEwen, is what percentage of employees are working from home?
It varies by the group, but Omicron and some of these other variants are being at home doesn't keep you safe. If you have small kids, which has been a big vector recently, then your chances of working at home and having one of your kids bring it home is pretty high. So that's not been a factor.
Well, right. So I asked the question because I feel like my purpose is to keep other employees safe, right? So I don't want an employee coming in, and they can avoid coming in doing from work because that's how their setup is. So whether they're asymptomatic or not, we need to not have employees come in to have an outbreak within City Hall, because regardless of my concern would be one employee comes in and I lose the entire water department, right? So they have to stay home. So we're requiring them to stay home to ensure we don't have an outbreak here at City Hall. So I almost feel it's a request from the city to say, hey, keep us safe by staying home, versus you have employees in some other organizations who are working from home all the time. Therefore, the concern isn't an outbreak at their organization.
So to extend on that though, where do you draw the line? If somebody has the sniffles and you can't come into the office, anything that looks respiratory, stay away. Pink eye, don't come into the office. I mean, there are some caveats we've made for the pandemic, but as we move on into the next phase, I think you have the same problem with anyone coming to work sick with anything.
I will say we don't have anybody that I'm aware of abusing this system, right? For the year and a half that it was in effect, very few people had to tap into the 80 hours. And that's really what we're looking at. As I stated, we do keep our employees busy because they want to stay busy. They want to do their job, whether it's, whatever. Anyway, they're staying busy, working from home, and it's not just busy work, it's things that actually need to be accomplished. So really my concern is ensuring that we don't have an outbreak here, and we're asking them to stay away. Because we really, throughout this entire pandemic, we've been working from the office. We have had very few people working from home, and it's only due to asking them to isolate. Now the sniffles is one thing. You only have access to this 80 hours if you have a positive COVID test. And I would say for the most part, employees who are not feeling well are not coming to the office just to be on the safe side, whether they've gotten tested or not. And again, they're using all-purpose leave for that. I don't feel inclined to support that, using these hours to support them because they think they have it. That's not the purpose of this policy.
Well, and don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to in any way indicate that anyone has been abusive of the policy. My concern is that does it require a special carve out And if so, for how long? And it sounds like the council's willing to go through the end of the fiscal year and maybe reevaluate. But I think we're going to get into a position where this is no different than an employee showing up to the office with the flu. Don't do that. That's bad for everybody else in the office.
Right. And really, again, back to my point earlier, and that is what the state is keeping track of these cases. People are required to go stand in line. When that stops happening, I feel like, okay, we're beyond this and it's like a flu. I would be okay treating it like a flu today if there wasn't documentation or the county potentially creating policies to tell us how to quarantine and when to isolate, and CDC guidelines telling us what's going on, you know, whether 5 days is acceptable or not. It's special because it's been created special by the federal government or potentially even our state, right? That's what makes it special.
But our governor just recently in a press release said, if you're sick, you probably have it. Don't go get tested.
On a human level, I'm concerned that it's a two-edged sword. I mean, and to George's point also, but on a human level, I get concerned that someone shows up to work because they feel like they don't have access to sick leave, because they've got to take care of their family, paycheck, etc., and then they get everybody else sick, and somebody else might get more sick, you know, whether it's the flu or whatever else it is, and these are special circumstances, but I just don't want to put one of our staff in a position where they're having to choose between a paycheck and getting everybody else sick. And luckily, the second note is, to your point, Brent, I'm just grateful for a great staff, employees that aren't taking advantage of it. If we had employees taking advantage of it, boy, that'd be a tough pill to swallow. But I think we're just grateful for a great staff and employees here in the city.
Well, that's an amazing thing to me too, Councilman, because Brent said this hasn't been used that much. And I'm going, wow, that's a testament to our
Here
employees.
comes one of our great staff right now.
You want to make a comment?
Yeah, if I could, I'm Mike Carlson, Public Works Director, just in case anybody's listening that cares. I'd like to chime in a little bit. I have 3 of my staff that's out right now. And under the direction of Brent, and some of the talking and things like that, I've asked my staff to go back to 1 person in a truck. You guys all know that I have a fear about not having enough guys to plow snow. So my guys have been really good. We had a little Christmas party that we held out in the shop, everything wide open, trying to protect everybody. But you know, one of the guys that's home right now is one of my newer employees. He's shows a lot of promise. Right now, I've assigned him to work at home. He's right now currently studying for his water test, which is a huge event in a new employee's life here at the city, and a requirement that we have so that he can move on to a water worker too. That's one area that he's working on. The other area is we're required to have NIM certificates, same as you guys, except we have a few more. He has those to work on as well. He also has a sexual harassment to work on. So these guys that when we have them work at home, we monitor their productivity. So, you know, do we need the 80 hours? I say yes, just because it gives us a cushion. You know, if we run out of those things for those guys to do, I'd like them to have somewhere to go. But, you know, these guys are very conscientious in what they do and how they do it. And I've appreciated my staff and how they go about attacking the COVID issue. You know, we still take it pretty serious. Sometimes the guys look at me and, you know, because we have a safety meeting out in the shop where it's wide open, they kind of think I'm a little weird. But my job is to make sure that I have staff to be put into plows and to fix water leaks and maintain the city to keep it going. And so, you know, I support Brent in the 80 hours. I think it helps out. I know that it's not a norm in all the different cities and government entities and that, but for us, with the newer staff that we have, you know, it was mentioned before, you know, I have 4 brand new guys plowing snow. That means I have 4 new individuals who do not have a lot of time. And so I just don't want to encourage them to come back to work before it's time. If anything, I hold them off a day or 2 longer to make sure that my staff's safe. But I do appreciate you considering it and helping us out. Thanks.
Thanks, Mike.
While our next excellent employee comes forward.
Haven't we already heard from you tonight?
He's been sitting back there all night just to come up again.
Yeah, Corey with Community Development, the management over the Community Development Department. I did stay purposely for this. It's a discussion we had as a department heads, and I'm also one that has had to struggle with the policy of what we're doing in employees staying home. Within our office area, we have a common area that we have in the past used masks, and some of our employees are still using masks because they're concerned. We also have employees that are in an age category that could be a risk, and even though there's a common area in the window, the public still shares that. We have to go to the window. And I do have, the risk of what I've had is people go get tested. And we've been lucky for the couple of tests that they've come up and it's just a cold. So they're tapping into their all-purpose sleeve that is going on. But the issue is if we have a breakout with the COVID, that's a mandatory from yet today that they have a 5-day policy that's there. And when you have somebody that's at risk and I agree with George, if we get to the new normal, that it becomes just like cold and we all deal with it that way, that's fine. But that's not the way the employees are feeling right now. They're feeling unsafe when somebody does come in the sniffles. And they want to know whether it's a COVID strain, and they want to know not about the employee, but they want employees to stay home during those 5 days because they fear that they're at risk of it because we're interacting with each other at the counter, several times a day. And my concern is that the employee has to take a day, get turned away at a testing center, has to take off another day just to get tested. Luckily, it's not a COVID. They can come back to work. My policy is whether you're sick with a cold or a flu, you come back and wear a mask because it's the individuals at risk that are unsure. They're concerned about employee coming in sick too. So we require the 5 days. They burn a couple that goes away to get tested to keep people safe. They feel better after 3 or 4 days. They have a choice to come in when it's pink eye or when it's the influenza when they want to come back in. And we don't have, you have to stay home because they're dealing with their sick time, so they're managing the risk. That bank has reduced for this past year. And so now I have the issue of if they get COVID, they're out of time. And now what do we do when somebody's out of time? And so I feel that if they burn the time, because they are on a low end for COVID, they built enough to cover the 40 hours, let's say, to take the 5 days. And then a month and a half later, they have a serious bout of flu. And we want them to stay home, not come to work, but they feel desperate to come to work. And now the others are uncomfortable even with that because they don't know whether it's COVID or the flu. And so I think until there's a change that society says, we're not making you stay home at 5 days, you come back when you feel better, and then we say mask up for 5 days after you have the flu just to keep people safe. I think the hygiene, the mask up, and I know I don't want to be political about masks, but that's where we're at with a policy in my department. Is you come back, it's 5 days, calendar days for masks to keep people safe whether you have the flu or not. So that's my struggle is what do we do with the people that are on the low end and they actually get tested and they've burned 2 days previously on another code to get cold remedy to get tested because the lines are long. I just think we need to have something to do that doesn't say you're out of time, come into work. Now, I realize independent contractor, I've built in the building community, you're building houses whether you're sick or not.
Maybe I'll submit my paperwork be a city employee. That's the alternative, really.
That is the alternative. But that's the issue. We could do that as a city. And I'm partly with George in my own personal life is that we're going to reach a level where it's part of how we deal with each other. And we do need to do the hygiene, wash your hands, stay home when you're sick, and all those other things. But right now, everybody's operating that we have a mandatory 5-day. Whether you're asymptomatic or not, you're home for 5 days if it shows up. So we try to work them from home. But I have like one employee that you would think she could work from home because she does nothing but office work. And now you have to take all of the paperwork that she processes and haul it in a pickup truck to her house and then haul it back just so she can work from home. So what I've done is a split schedule. She comes in at 3:30 after the public works crew is gone and works till 9 o'clock at night in that situation. That's how we've handled it. So it is what it is, but I support some benefit to the employees.
Thank you, I agree with that. My other thing I agree with a lot of what George has said, but we have got $3 million from the federal government for COVID. So to me, that makes me feel a little more comfortable. We may not be able to use that for this, but we can use that for something else that we would have needed the money that we're going to use this for. So because we've been given money from the federal government, we're not given money for the flu or any of those things, and we have been given a lot of money for the COVID expenses. I work for the city, and I don't get any sick leave, just in case you wanted to know. If I get COVID and I'm with the little children every day, I'm just out. We actually have a crossing guard out right now with COVID. So, but I do think that because we get the money, I'm comfortable in doing it, but I wouldn't want to do it past June either. I'd want to reevaluate.
Is that because you're a part-time employee, Robin? Why wouldn't you have access to this?
I don't have access to it.
George is asking, is that because you're
Oh,
part-time?
yes,
employee?
that's because I'm a part-time employee and Brett hates me.
Oh, gosh.
So,
I'm going to make a motion.
we beat this up, yeah, let's get a motion.
I'm going to make a motion to approve resolution number 2022-05, extending the emergency paid sick leave provisions of the FFCRA from July 1st, 2021 through June 30, 2022.
Second.
Motion and a second. Let's vote.
Aye.
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 George?
Aye.
I think he spoke the same.
Oh, sorry, you went at the same time as somebody else. All right, that passes 5-0. Great, let's go on to a discussion.
It's a chance for a quick break.
Oh, we're
I'm not used to these long meetings.
for a quick 5-minute break. We'll blow through the rest of it after our 5 minutes.
Mike's back on?
Yep.
Hey, you're up, Cam.
Nate, what I'm gonna do some
We're switching up agenda items.
flipping. All right, we back on? All right, welcome everyone, we're back. We are gonna go to item number 10 and come back to 9. The item number 10 is the quarterly financial report. We're halfway through the year. If you recall, we have Nate report every quarter. Nate or Marcus has reported, and then on monthly, they just present them to us and we ask if we them any questions if we have any. So Nate, this is one of those 4 times a year where you report to us, right?
That's correct. And I recognize the time, so I'll be brief and allow some time for questions if you have any. I'll wait for her to pull
One thing, Nate, as he's pulling it up, you'll see he's added these little boxes, which have been nice for us.
That is nice.
Yeah, for highlighted areas. He's just done that in the last couple of times he's presented.
All right. So to start, if we could go to the next page. So right on this page is our cash position by fund. You'll see that total citywide, we have about 9.7 million in cash. Something new to this financial statement that at least you haven't seen since the last time I reported on it, is our capital improvement fund right there in the middle. So if you recall back in June at the end of last fiscal year, as part of the budget amendment that council approved, we wanted to move anything in excess of 20% in the general fund. We wanted to move it into our newly established capital improvement plan. So it took some time to finalize the numbers. We finally knew what that excess of 20% would be. It was either in October or November. So now you see that it was about 1.7 million. Now the note that goes along with that, if you see in the general fund, we're sitting at about 3.9 million in cash, but that includes just over $1 million from the ARPA funds, which is the American Rescue Plan Act, the COVID money that came when Biden was first put into office. So anyway, that made up $1 million of that 3.9 is from ARPA. So as we increased our general fund cash, that did influence the amount that got moved into capital improvements. So another way to look at it is if we didn't have that 1 million in ARPA funds, there would probably have only been about 700,000 that got moved into capital improvement.
Those are restricted funds on specific expenditures?
The ARPA?
Yeah.
Yes. So there are, I don't want to get huge into ARPA tonight, but there are 4 categories that we can spend it. One is revenue replacement, another is COVID relief, and there's infrastructure, water and sewer infrastructure, and I'm drawing a blank on the 4th.
Is it still through 2024?
Yeah.
Did you say broadband?
Okay, so there is a sunset.
Did you say broadband?
Yeah, oh yeah, broadband. That's part of the water sewer.
Nate, will you mention, while you're on ARPA, it was in my council, my city manager report, but will you mention the rules that just came out regarding uses or how we can allocate those funds so council's aware?
Yeah, so with the ARPA funds, they came out with, when they were first released, they gave us this general guidance. There were a lot of questions. So then shortly after, they came out with an interim final rule and allowed governments to provide feedback and ask more questions. Well, just this last week or two, they came out with their final rule on how we can spend it. So in the initial rule, there was the revenue replacement category. It was, to summarize it, it was a somewhat complicated spreadsheet. You put in your pre-COVID financial numbers. It ran through a calculation, and based on that calculation, it kicked out a number that said you lost this much in revenue and allowed you to use that amount of the ARPA funds to just plug back into your general fund. Well, now with this final rule, they left that in place, but also added a second category that they called the standard allowance. So this allows us to claim up to 10 million. Now we're only getting about 2 million total, so we could claim the entire 2 million as revenue replacement, which would go back into the general fund that we can then use on any governmental service. The two things that they wouldn't allow us to use it on is going towards pensions or placing it in a rainy day fund. But that, to me right now, that sounds like one of the best options to use ARPA funds. It's the most open category. It allows us to keep it in the general fund and use it towards any governmental expenditure. Now, it did just come out recently, so I'm still reading through the fine print of it, trying to figure it out, but right now I think that's the best option.
What that does, it'll remove the strings and the restrictions of the funds, but it doesn't necessarily have to change how we spend the funds. We could still use it for the green steel tank replacement as we had intended, because that's a qualifying. But really, it just makes it an easy audit or monitoring, when they come and audit us and how we spent it. If we just use this, and it removes all those strings and it frees up the funds that we can use them as we see fit. We can still use them for the intended purposes that we had originally, but it just changes the conversation a little bit.
So our emergency chase lane repair could come out of ARPA funds, correct? Streets and water?
Well, it's a repair though. It's not, I don't know.
Must be a new.
They're hesitating, you need to review it still?
Yeah.
Yeah, because,
Okay.
so
That's fine.
water is its own fund, right? It's an enterprise fund, which is different than a governmental fund. So
Fair enough.
while under ARPA, it does allow us to build water, sewer, and broadband infrastructure, but those rules are more on, like the green tank would qualify under that rule, where you're expanding or building a new infrastructure. Repairs, I don't think would qualify under ARPA.
Okay, thanks.
And I found my notes on the other uses, so it's revenue replacement, public health and economic impact, premium pay was the one I was forgetting, and then building water, sewer, and broadband infrastructure.
So, December of 20, we had $3.3 million in the general fund. We transferred $1 million during the 12-month period to the capital improvement fund. So that would have taken $1 million out of the general fund. Get you to 2.3, and we're at 3.7 right now. What's the other big increase to the general fund?
I think sales tax is playing a factor in there.
Yeah, with sales tax, we'd have, so maybe the sales tax increase.
Bill, you're probably saying, wouldn't we have expended that?
Well, I'm just looking at static year to year. You have sales tax every year, so.
Right.
Sales tax is up, so and we were up fairly nicely. What we were up, $350,000-$400,000?
Yeah, we're about 380, 390 now. But so keep in mind, so the cash position is that, doesn't necessarily mean it's what's not allocated or obligated. These funds could be obligated, right, to various projects. It's just our cash position currently. So yeah, our sales tax has been great. The COVID, the CARES Act funding went straight into, we used $1 to $1.2 million was able to go into our reserves. So that increased that as well, so.
Which one was first, ARPA or
CARES.
CARES?
So CARES, we've used all the CARES. That's over and done now.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
In May, we got the $1 million from ARPA, and then we're expecting our second payment to come in May of this year, or we'll get another $1 million.
Heard anything about the finalization of the grant that we're going to use towards the new water tank?
No.
That's Mike's favorite topic to discuss. I think February is the latest that we'll potentially hear the results of that.
Yeah.
I can kind of give a little bit of an update. I was very positive that we were going to get it, and Mike Miller made a comment that we may not. But yet, then there was another one that says by mid-February, we should know whether we're gonna get it or not.
Who's Mike Miller? I'm sorry.
Mike Miller's with the Ferguson Group. So the method that we would try to do would be to go after another grant, another infrastructure grant that they have, if this one doesn't come through. But by mid-February, we should know one way or the other on that. From what I gather out of it, I kept thinking it was going to be clear back in October. We were pretty excited about moving forward with it, but it just keeps going on and on and on. But he stated the last time that we talked, probably mid-February, we would know whether they're going to approve it or not.
But he wasn't as optimistic as he'd been before.
Yeah, it's kind of like going downhill, but I'm hoping that somebody's going to hit it out of the ballpark right at the end and get it for us, because I'm really hoping that we get it.
The Build Back Better, right, legislation that didn't pass, that failed, it would have been a big part of that, the $3 trillion package. So since it failed, there are still funds available in the other package. It's just not as lucrative as it once was. Doesn't necessarily mean it's off the table. It's just now prioritizing projects from there.
Well, and he mentioned too that it could slide through into another bracket with Congressman Stewart too.
Right.
So there's some hope for it to still happen, and
It's still an important project for Congressman Stewart's office.
Yeah, they still keep giving us hope as well too, but they're very similar to the Ferguson Group.
Yeah, I'm hoping. I keep crossing my fingers.
Anyway, if you have a chance the next day or so to think about it, I understand it's a below the belt question, but that's almost $1 million, and I'm trying to figure out where else we would have gotten $1 million.
Yeah, and it could have been just, I mean, we're looking at cash, so looking at cash flow, a lot of our big projects happen in summer months. I mean, our street projects could have impacted that. But yeah, I can look into it further.
Okay, don't spend too much time, but I'm curious.
Yeah, no, definitely.
So can we use that ARPA fund for the 80 hours of
Yes.
COVID training?
Yes, it's, like I said, it's not going to be that many hours that are going to be used. But yeah, absolutely, we could tap into ARPA funds. Now, again, I'd rather not, because it's a monitoring, auditing issue that we have to document, that if we just remove those restrictions, it would move it into the general fund, and then we can pay for it out of the general fund. If you have a lot of little projects, federal money, it's just impossible to monitor. It's a fund for staff to try and keep track of all that documentation. So it's easier to remove the restrictions through this standard allowance, and then we can use the funds as we see fit without the restrictions. So, yes, I mean, we'd have the funds available to our general fund to allow that, to pay for that benefit, yes.
Yeah, I believe we, especially with the capital improvement fund, that'll be a big part of this budgeting cycle as we prepare for the budgeting for the next year. We plan to, plan that out and come back to council with some answers for those. Other thing to note on this page, on the very right-hand side, you see our interest rate for our state pool, our PTIF investment funds. It remains very low. It kind of tanked once COVID hit, and it's still at a poor rate. A little bit of concern here is the water fund. It's a bit lower than I would like to see it. That's something we'll probably need to address here in the near future. If you go to the next page, again, it's a breakout by fund, but it shows your total fund cash on the left and then the restricted cash on the right.
So back, you're going a little fast. Back on the water fund, a year ago you were at 150. Now you're at 324. Why are you saying it's low?
Because we want to do about $1.5 million of capital improvements in the water fund, and if we only have a rolling average of $325,000, it doesn't give us the funds to keep up with the master plan.
So just from a budgeting and from an administrative standpoint, I think it'd be helpful on our next budget cycle if each department head kind of let us know, hey, we'd like to be at, or we need to be at these balances in order to hit our prioritization or our maintenance schedules, whatever they want to call them. I think that's helpful for us when we look at that, we look at our budgets moving forward. And maybe you already do that.
So he has done that in conjunction with the budgeting, but it just doesn't flow through to the statement.
So it's part of the, these are the things, the budget process, I was going to discuss that in my city manager report, I'll discuss it briefly here, and you can ask questions if you have more questions. Is essentially, we meet administratively, we figure out how, and we present to you a balanced budget from all departments. But at the same time, when department heads present to you, I like them to go over their long-term or their wish list items, so you're aware of what's kind of on the horizon. Now, you as the council can change the priorities and say, well, no, can we hold off on that? Because I really think this is a big deal within the revenue parameters, right? That's a policy decision on your part, but a balanced budget comes before you. And then you can make policy decisions on the budget going from there. But they will present their needs, right?
But on a positive note, the drainage fund is in excellent shape. I know I was a little worried about that at the end of last fiscal year, but it played out a lot better than I thought. So that's in good shape. If we go to the next page, I know these are a little hard to read, so I apologize. First, looking at our revenues on the top part there, if you'll notice our property tax, the majority of that comes in November and December. Perfect. So we did receive the majority of our property tax. I've seen December's numbers that we just received in January, and it was another, I think, close to 300,000. So you can see we got the majority of our property tax, which is great. Sales tax remains strong, which is really good. We're sitting at about 6% above our budgeted amounts, which is right on par with inflation. If you remember, our sales tax is paid out 2 months after the sale occurs. We're looking at, in December we received money from October sales, and inflation in October was right in that 6% range. So that's a little bit why we see that increase. Going down to some of the expenses, you'll see in the legislative line, I made that note, there's just over $20,000 in the legislative contingency line item. That was for the neighborhood patrol that the police is doing. So they've used about 20,000 in that and still have about 10,000 remaining for the year. The rest of it, I've underlined departments that have used over 50% of the budget. Most of those are small dollar amounts. So it's not a big concern for me. They're pretty close to where I expect them to be. The elections does appear a little high. We budgeted just for a general election because that's what's happened in the past. This year is the first time in a while that we've had a primary election. So each time there's an election, it's $16,000 that we pay the county. So it did go over budget on that due to the primary and general election. So yeah, and then at the bottom you can see.
As a newbie, why is there a Whitaker line item and a Whitaker home line item? Why do we not have Whitaker all in one line item budget?
Line 27, line 47, he's referring to that.
Yeah.
Yes, I believe, so the Whitaker's complicated. You have the Whitaker department that is out of the, is paid out of the general fund. So that's, the salary, a little bit of the operations. And then you have the Whitaker fund that is paid through RAP tax. Is where it gets its funding.
Which is which?
Through the arts. So the bottom, the Whitaker home, would be the RAP, I believe. And then the upper one.
Yeah.
So one is an operational and one is a capital. Okay.
Good question.
But you can see our Net income at the bottom is about 1.2 million for the year, and that's total revenues minus your total expenditures were 1.2 million in the positive. So that is great. That's all I had prepared. If you have any questions, be happy to answer them.
Just quickly, when you look at the line item, the summary budget, because you say refer to page 52 or page 60, which I did, some of them say zero budget. Is that because they roll up to another different, larger pool for each budget?
Yeah, so I'll need to go there. I'll show you the example. You'll see like it's a capital project line, and then we have all the capital projects broken out underneath it.
So those should roll up and be the sum of those below it?
Right.
One thing we're working on this, so we wrap our capital improvement essentially into our budget. And I think I've stated this before. Nate's working on separating those. We should have an operating budget, so you're fully aware as council what it costs to run a city, and then a separate budget with capital improvement, which are the needs to help operate, right? So we've always currently had just capital improvement wrapped up into our operating, so it's not really truly separated or understood what it costs. And there are times where I've gotten worried, and I've seen this in the past in other cities, that you add an item in for a car, potentially a vehicle, and it just gets kind of rolled over into the next budget, and then just keeps getting rolled over, and you're like, what is this? I mean, you no longer need that capital equipment. So we're going to start separating those out.
Just, Nate, you can answer this question later in an email to me, but so for example, the transportation fund, getting back to my question on page 52 of your report, not the PDF file, but 52 of your financial report. So you have capital projects in the transportation fund of 1.44 million, but if I add up like the Parish Lane, Noah Drive, all the others that are zeroed out budget items, that doesn't add up to 1.4. So I'm trying to figure out how they roll up and what's accounted for in a simple way.
Yeah, so our 1.4 is the amount that we have budgeted for the entire year.
Okay.
If you look in the actual column, so like for the Parish Lane intersections, we've spent 5,600, and Nola Drive, we spent 43,000.
Right.
Those are the actual amounts that we've spent. So on all these different projects, our budget amount is the 1.4. That's what we actually spent. So if you subtract our actuals from our budget, that's what you'll see is the remaining budget amount.
So you've created a new line item for each one of those.
Yeah.
So in the past,
So you're not budgeting necessarily for specific projects.
well, kind of. So in the past, we used to just have miscellaneous street projects with no list of what projects, and I don't like that, right? Because you're miscellaneous, and what are you actually doing? So we've incorporated the projects to help you as a council understand what our priorities are with the funds this year. But we actually we have an idea what the budget might be, but until we get there, we don't know. We might have to remove one of these projects if we start bumping up against the 1.4 million.
So, for example, the Chase Lane fix could bump something else out of the picture.
In the budget, they do break down, not every project, but a lot of the projects would be broken down by amount. If you look at our budget document. Anything else?
Well, I believe so.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very good questions that were asked, and thanks for the report. Let's go back to number 9. This is the discussion on proposed staff report and agenda templates for transitioning to our civic clerk. Lisa, you want to go over that a bit for us?
Yes, thank you. Mayor and council, a few months ago, the council approved a contract to move to a new agenda software through Civic Clerk. So we're transitioning from our Novus agenda to the Civic Clerk. And the city recorder and I and other staff members have been having Zoom meetings with civic clerk to try to assist with that transition, sort of bringing a lot of our information and packets from Novus, so we might have some history to search. But one of the first steps in this transition is to prepare a template for our staff, cover sheets, which we call staff report, but it's really just the cover sheet, and then also our agenda. And so we thought this would be a good opportunity to actually make some improvements. So hopefully you like the look of the new agenda, but we thought we better just bring it to you and make sure that we're headed in the right direction, and also find out if there's, anything that you would like to see added. I don't want to get into too much of a wish list, but we're pretty far along in the process. But basically, we're going to come up with an agenda and a staff report cover sheet for the city council, and then they're going to take that and create 12 other templates for the Planning Commission, Board of Adjustment, Whitaker, Tree, all of our committees. So we're just trying to get a very standardized agenda for all of our boards and committees, starting with the city council as a priority. Our number one question, and we're asking you, is can we use the logo that was created and is currently on your website? So we have a logo on the website. When we tried to update the look of the website, our previous city recorder, I think, had actually created this logo. As staff, we like it. It's much more linear. It's hard to make the circle logo. It takes up a lot of space. So you either put it on one side or the other, and Civic Clerk had created a template for us, and it just looked already dated. So we're just kind of trying to update the look. We tried a lot of different colors and things like that, but basically, are you okay if we use this logo rather than our old logo? We won't take it personally if you want us to go back and work with the circle or something, but it might have to go to the side. So anyway, that's question number one. Can we use this new logo? I will say that it has been a priority, I think, since Brant was hired as a city manager, to do some rebranding. So it is on our list to have a more updated logo, some other items, but that's a longer term process, and we really, we have a month or two, and we've got to have this Civic Clerk live. So the other thing I wanted to point out is we're also trying to standardize the order that we put things on the agenda, and then we can just click a button and it'll either, like if we have presentations, it'll just populate that and then staff can fill it in. If we have, the other thing that I added was, since every time we have a financial report, I just thought, well, let's make that a button we can click, and then there'll be drop downs where we can say, oh, this is the monthly, this is the quarterly, or this is the annual, and it'll just automatically, well, hopefully, add some of those things. We're also, some of the feedback just from staff that we've received is trying to be more specific. Again, under the Open Meetings Act, we have to explain agenda items with reasonable specificity to notify the public what you're going to talk about. So I would like to be more consistent. When we have a rezone, we want to say it's a rezone of this address, of this property owner, from this zone to this zone. So, it's always the same. And so anyway, I should stop there, but it's really exciting. We would like to take some of your input. I know sometimes I hear from the council, well, who prepares these and why isn't this here? So if you really have something on your wish list, or there's just something that's not working, or you want us to go back to the old logo, that's what we're looking for tonight. And Jennifer, I don't know if you want to add anything, but Jennifer's been doing most of the work. I just thought I would take the criticism here tonight if you don't like this.
Well, the problem is you said something that invites a totally different off-topic topic, Lisa, and that was reasonable specificity as related to items on the agenda. We have a city manager report, a mayor report, and a council report that don't include specificity. Are you saying we need to add that?
On those, we used to add line items And I think that's why I have also added, and it might be too much, I kind of want to get each subheading to be 3 lines. So I might try to reduce that, but I think what we say there is, look, the city manager report or the mayor's report is information only. We're not going to make a decision because we're not being that specific or, So I think that's fine on those as long as you're not making a decision. And that's where we've added this other thing is if the mayor or the city manager or even a department head brings up something that you think, oh, maybe we should have that on another agenda. Well, now we have a space on our agenda to talk about, hey, how many of you really want us to put something else on the agenda? And so there's a placeholder. If in any of those reports, then you can bring it back up here and staff will come back with some information. We're not saying that's the only way you can get things on the agenda. Our city ordinance actually allows, if 2 council members want something on the agenda, they can get it on the agenda. Otherwise, the agenda is determined by the mayor with the assistance of the city manager.
I really liked when we had the manager's report and the mayor's report and it listed what was going to be on it. That was something, I always really liked, and I've missed it since it's not on there, because it just gave you a little more knowledge of what was going to be talked about. If you had questions, you could check it out before time. So, if that's a possibility, I enjoyed that before. I mean, that was always on before.
Yeah, and maybe if it's large items like, a fire board report or something like that, or that they know, and then other items probably come up, between Friday and Tuesday, so.
And during this meeting.
And during this meeting.
I can do that better for you. I just won't tell you what I had for lunch.
Right. But I just like that, because sometimes, something's said and I'm, out in the blue, and if I'd known it was going to be talked about a little bit, I'd have been a little more prepared for it. So when we used to do it, I probably don't like change, I don't know, but I liked it.
Okay, great.
Do you
Thanks.
really want to call it legislative prayer of thought as opposed to just prayer of thought, which it is now? Periodically, the mayor invites one of the pastors in the community to come and do it, which I think is a good idea.
Yeah.
So I would suggest you maybe take off legislative.
Yeah, I can look into that. Back when it was challenged whether a local legislative body could have a prayer, and it was somebody, well, actually even here in Utah, they would send somebody to the meetings and they'd say, no, we already have somebody. So anyway, cities were being challenged, and so what you needed to do was come up with a policy and say, okay, well, it's this or this, and anybody can request. So I would have to research. I don't know. I haven't seen I think we adopted a policy. I don't know where it is, but that's where the legislative prayer term was in response to those challenges to say, well, it doesn't necessarily have to be religious. It can just be
But it doesn't say legislative prayer of thought now.
Mm-hmm.
It just says prayer of thought.
Okay, I'll look at that.
Yeah, I think
I probably added.
He's just concerned that what if it's not one of the legislative bodies? What if it's a pastor from the community?
Yeah.
You've delegated that, right? Or you've reached out to somebody that you've done it, I guess.
Yeah, we have.
Well, as a planning commissioner, I tried to reach out to have somebody do it. It didn't end up working. Scheduling it didn't happen.
I know.
Reached out to somebody else.
The other thing maybe you should do is have something that if a member of the community would like to do that, they can email you or something, and then you can ask them. I'm not trying to.
Yeah, we usually rotate.
Yeah, usually it's rotated amongst the council, but periodically, about once every 6 months, it seems like, maybe every 3 to 6 months, you have one of the pastors come in and do it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
We're trying to get him in.
Yeah, I'll look into that. I'll see if we have a policy and review the case law again, and we can see if we can take that out.
In terms of your question number 1, I like the logo change.
I don't really care, whatever you need to do.
It says Centerville City. Great, works great for me.
Yeah.
Yay, okay.
I know this is partly substance and partly style, and the actual agenda, so.
Right.
To me, it doesn't.
So this is probably.
What's that?
Yes, the next one needs to say Utah.
Yeah,
That's been the
not
staff,
Ohio.
Well, I'm fighting social media and the
website, Searchability Ohio,
Yeah.
and a couple other cities. So having the word text Utah is very specific.
Right.
where
For
I see
your
it's very
SEO
broad.
or something?
Yeah,
Yes.
SEO is hard to manage.
And maybe we can put some money in the budget upcoming for our rebranding and get, I think that's a good suggestion that we need in our logo and a little bit more input, but this one at least is more functional.
If this is pretty much fixed, having presentations before business items probably works on some presentations, and you've got the police department commendations, which I would think you would generally put first. But some of the other things probably ought to go down in the business items, kind of like the second thing you have, South Davis Rec Center. That was really more of a business thing than it was.
Yeah, I agree, and we can drag.
I want to give the mic up.
Give it to me.
There you go.
Were you worried that somebody was going to bring that up? Is that why you're chuckling?
Well, Lisa won't give me the mic. She's like, you're taking my thunder away. Presentations are really just intended that when you have people here, it's those presentations of accommodation or, accommodations or whatever it might be, not an item. And that's the business item. So presentations generally will always be at the front because you don't want to take up their time. You want them in and they want to be able to leave so they don't have to stay for the whole meeting. So rarely will you see presentations that we're referring to beyond the first item.
She wants the mic back.
I want this back. And I agree. Sometimes we've had update presentations that last 1 hour at the beginning of our meeting. And that is your best brain power before you're tired, before it's 9 or 10 o'clock at night. So I agree. We need to put, and that's why we put the more difficult items up first. And that's why we have our public hearings. Well, so the public can come at a reasonable hour. But I totally agree that, yeah, some of those can go. And you'll see, even in our agendas, we do. We rank them from difficult to less difficult. So at whatever time it is, we're talking about agenda templates.
10:36.
I don't mind that Bryce, Nate, and Mike are here, right? But I do care when you're paying a consultant or a contractor, and you want the business items first and residents first, so we're paying them. The only one I have an issue with is when Kevin Campbell is here. He's expensive when he stays all night. But so anyway, that's the intent, is trying to get the people out. Staff items we usually have like this towards the end of the agenda. I'm out. That's all you know.
I like it.
Okay, thanks. We'll keep working on it. And once we get these the way we want, we are planning on probably having them give you a training in a work session or something like that, and kind of a presentation. So there will be
How soon do
time.
you think that's going to be?
I think that's currently scheduled for March 1st, the March 1st work session, and they'll just be going over some of the board features of the Civic Clerk software, so you can go in and you can make notes and annotations and just how you'll be able to access the new agenda.
So I've never done that in Novus, but
That's why there's going to be training on it.
okay.
Yeah. I don't know if there are features like that right now in Novus, but that's one of the updates.
There are, but
There are,
okay.
but
They
Paul
were very
Cutler was the
cumbersome.
only one that could ever use them.
And you won't be
Tammy, is
required
it?
to use them. We just want you to know what's available to you and know how to use it if you do want to utilize those features. So, and hopefully it'll be quick.
So, Lisa, thanks. You just wanted to inform, you don't need a support or motion or anything on it, do you?
I think I got the feedback that I wanted.
Okay,
Yes, on the logo.
great. All right, let's go to, we did 10, let's go to 11. This is the city council appointments to boards and committees, and let me try and explain what I tried to do here. I reached out to each one of you through text or calling to see if you were okay with your appointments, and I appreciate each one of you getting back to me and saying that was good. And thanks for the opportunity. I tried to give us all at least a couple or three things. One may be more time intensive than the others. It should be noted that we have some committee leadership positions in some of these. Councilmember McEwen is the chair of the Mosquito Abatement Board. I'm on the executive board of Wasatch Integrated Management. I'm the vice chair with the South Davis Metro, and some of you, the rest of you may be. The only change I have to this is because the rec district, I had myself down and Councilman Summerhays on Wasatch Integrated Waste Management Board, but I realized I am on the executive board of Wasatch Integrated, so I'm proposing that be switched, that I stay on the Wasatch Integrated Waste Management Board and Council Member Summerhays goes to the South Davis Recreation District. The only thing that is not filled in here, and because this is, council does this, is the mayor pro tem. That's usually only a year's your time frame, and I think that the last three have been Robin and Bill and George, if I'm not mistaken, and so I'm fine with whoever there. I'd propose maybe council member Gina Hurst, but whatever we want to decide there. So that is, there'll be some, no, we won't discuss that until that actually potentially happens as far as the, but that's what I tried to do in trying to give us all some opportunities, and like I said, with George being the chair of the mosquito board, and it just makes sense he continues there. Plus, we had him out in another couple of years, and some other leadership as well too. So, any questions on that? What I have, like I said, I tried to reach out to each one of you and see if you felt good about your appointments.
We need to make a motion on the mayor pro tem.
Yes, we do.
Lisa, do we make a motion on the mayor pro tem?
Then we'll add it to this, and then we'll plot it in and adopt the resolution adopting the entire term.
So we got that motion, Lisa, right, and then just the adoption of the whole schedule, right?
Yeah, so I think it would be helpful to just have a motion first on the appointing mayor pro tem.
What about that change? I talked with you about it. We didn't get it changed on the printed, but
Yeah, I think you can just, in your motion, say adopting resolution 2022-04, whatever it is.
He's talking about the change from me.
Did I stay on the Wasatch Integrated Waste Management and
I go to rec district?
Yeah, just add that change in your motion.
Yeah.
I'll make a motion.
Okay.
I'll make a motion is it appoint Mayor Pro Tem Councilwoman Gina Hurst and make the changes as discussed, moving Mayor Clark Wilkinson to the Wasatch Integrated Waste Management District Board and Councilmember Summerhays to the South Davis Recreation District.
Second.
Motion and second.
If you could just add to that motion then to approve the resolution as well.
Oh yeah, because it was a resolution.
So I'll amend my motion to also include the, adopt the appointments as otherwise stated, or represented in the staff report.
Second.
Do we need accepting resolution 2022-04? Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Okay. Thank you. Let's go to item number 12. This is summary action calendar. We have 3 items on there: bond reduction, eradication of Chase Lane Street rebuild project award, and purchase of shoplift upgrade equipment for public works. Any questions on any of these? Obviously, number 2 is the rebuild from the water main break.
Are we fixing anything else while we've got that road torn up?
Mike,
What was the question? I'm sorry.
run up here really quick. Councilwoman She's asking if we're fixing anything else while we have that road torn up.
See, you're taking all the stuff from my city manager report, Councilmember Meekum. So it's great. Mine will be much shorter. Go ahead.
Well, it's getting late, so.
Just what Brent said. I'm just gonna go with that one. We have looked at everything. I've got the guys working on 2 valves that were installed in that time. They dug them up today. They were about half worn, so we replaced them. So crossing our fingers that there is nothing else. I think everything is good. The road was built, Chase Lane from Main Street up was built in the time frame when we used stainless steel bolts, so I'm not too worried. There was a side street, a Shadow Mountain Circle and Doris Circle that was installed in that era of bad bolt time. And so there is one more that I'm gonna have them wait and do in the summer, but for that, they'll pave them and we should be all done. Crossing my fingers, not guaranteeing anything, but I'm crossing my fingers there is nothing else. There shouldn't be anything else. It's all good water main. It's should be all ready to roll, so.
'Cause that was all replaced when Chase was redone, right?
Right. Yeah, when we did Chase from, with the well and that, we did that, and then we added a couple things this year. Actually, from what Kevin was saying, that cut that we made this year saved it from going all the way down to Main Street, basically, that trench and the compaction. So when the water hit that, it pushed it up and out. So it saved quite a little bit of asphalt, he thinks. So it's just kind of one of those what-if things that worked out right. But, yeah, so it should be good. And I think they're paving Friday.
Sweet.
That's awesome.
When a valve fails like that,
What's that?
when a valve fails like that, is the valve isolated so that the water comes up and out, or is it always underneath?
Well, what's interesting about it is it has there's, depending on what size valve, but it has so many bolts going around bolting it together. In this case, the valve box lid, what Dave reported to me is it was sealed tight, so it forced the water out. If that valve box lid would have came out, which is it's not a maintenance issue at all, but if it would have blown out, but I've seen, not in our town, in other towns, I've seen a whole top section of valve go off the top just because of the bolts. Now, the ones that they did on Doris and Shadow Mountain, they were able to go in and do one bolt at a time, so we didn't affect anybody with water or anything. So, this is going forward a maintenance area. We did the saddles in the past. Now we want to move on to valves, and I've got Mike identifying the valves that we're going to be doing from 1990 to 2000 is the era that we got to do. That's in 2000 is when the valve manufacturers come out with stainless steel. We jumped on board immediately, and so we've got that era in there. The ones before that I don't know why we never have any problems with them, but we don't. But we're also looking at, am I still in all your report? So we're trying to identify, is there an age group between 1990 and 2000? Is there like 3 years it's a bad area? So if we can identify those valves, we'll go attack those areas first and then work our way back out to where we have all of them done. I mean, it's, the bolts are about $20 per valve, and then to dig them down and to fix them. I imagine that, I'm thinking about $1,200 patched, everything done, we can have a contractor come and do it for, and maybe even better depending on the economy and when it is. So it's just the next step that we need to make. That's our weak point. One other area that, not to this job, but to Main Street, where me and Kevin's looking at infrastructure grants that we may be able to start taking some of that main out and replacing it with grants. So
How old was the valve at Chase Lane?
that valve was 1993 was when it was put in.
And when was your hopeful schedule of replacing that valve?
Well, it's
what's the regular life expectancy of a valve?
Oh, I mean, you put stainless steel in, they're epoxy coated valves, you're 80, 90 years. I mean, they should last for a long time. I mean, it's not going to be the valve that goes bad, it's going to be another mechanism in that. So
25 years?
I mean, and I will state, that, Centerville has done a good job. We've done a good job in trying to keep up with specs. Whenever a specification comes out, we jump on it. It was just like, when back in the day, the developer was allowed to come in and put saddles on and they bought the cheaper ones. Obviously, they're trying to make money, and so the more expensive was $4 or $5 a piece. So all of a sudden, the city got stuck replacing a bunch of saddles in town, and so, you know, we were getting them done for about $750 a piece, but it would have been cheaper to do it in the beginning, and that's kind of why, you know, and I've always worried about after we're gone, you know, that we buy our own materials. That way we're guaranteed what's going in and we know what's going in. We don't have to worry about, you know, did they go buy a cheap one or whatever. So we try to make it to where we're taking care of the,
Don't we have a city spec though that
we do have a city spec, but we found that they'll go pick them up wherever. There's different brands. If our guys go down and fix something, they either know it's either, you know, you talk brass, it's either Ford or Mueller. If it's a valve, it's either Clow,
But you
Watrous.
could specify no
You
substitutions,
can,
right?
but it's just, you know, then you're having to watch all that stuff happen. And even at this time, you know, and I'm not gonna use the company that's in town, we were buying 3% cheaper than they were. So I mean, it's not really was a big cost savings or a cost to the developer. We're actually, a lot of them actually liked it because we're just taking care of it and getting it over with. They never had to worry about it, so anyhow. That answer it? That was a long answer to your question.
Thanks.
So,
Well, we got you. Anything else on summary action? Questions for him? Okay, do I have a motion to approve the summary action calendar?
I wasn't fast enough.
Oh, yeah, you're good.
I take it the shoplift is basically in the budget?
Yes, it's in the budget.
oh yeah.
I'd make a motion that we approve the purchase of the items on the summary action calendar as reviewed and outlined.
I'll second that.
All right, let's do a roll call vote. Councilwoman Meekum?
Aye.
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 Motion passes 5-0. Let's go to minutes review and acceptance from January 4th, 2022 City Council minutes. Did you see any changes that you would like to make? If not, do I have a motion to accept the minutes?
I'll make a motion to accept the minutes from January 4th.
All right, we got a second over here. You good? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Great, thank you. Let's go to our city council report from Councilwoman Gina Hurst.
Okay.
Gave you a lot of time, didn't we?
Yeah. And I'll be quick. I just wanted to discuss some of the things that are maybe a priority to me. I know you're all going to be shocked that I care about our infrastructure, and that's one of the things that I've been working on since being elected, is just moving through some of the data that the city has, staff and Kevin Campbell have provided, our master plans for our water and our stormwater, as well as they have a roads model, how they track the maintenance on our roads. Additionally, the governor just released the first chapter of a report called Utah's Coordinated Action Plan for Water. In our training a couple of weeks ago that the mayor and I attended, they talked quite a bit about infrastructure and the billions of dollars that is essentially going to have to, Utah's going to be coming up with 40 billion just for water projects. Over half of that will be repair and replacement of existing infrastructure. So my question to our city staff was, are we keeping up with infrastructure funding? And Bill, to your point about the Water Enterprise Fund, I would say that fund is too low. It's, especially when you look at 324,000, we just had a valve that blew up that's going to cost 220,000 to repair the road. So as we look at our budgets, as we're coming into this period of time where we'll look at that, I think that's, you know, we have to consider some of that. The other funds look, you know, better. I would say roads, in talking with Mike and Kevin, we hope for 100-year life on a road. And that's with appropriate maintenance. In Centerville, that means a crack seal every 5 years, slurry seal every 10 years, an overlay every 20 years. If we mill the roads, we can get 2 to 3 overlays before we need a complete rebuild. Right now, we're not funding at that rate to keep up with that. We're funding just over half that amount annually. We talked about the break on Chase Lane. A couple of the roads last year on NOLA Drive, Weber Basin, The city worked with Weber Basin to come up with a game plan to replace infrastructure under the roads. Weber Basin replaced their water line under NOLA Drive last year. The city was not able to do that. So I'm not saying we can solve all of this. This is always going to be an issue, is funding infrastructure, but just as we're planning, hopefully we can look for and continue to find solutions to fund that infrastructure so that we're not kicking that can down the road. That we envision what Centerville needs, we research and we understand the required infrastructure needs for our community, and we start taking those small steps today to make sure that we're finding the solutions that protect our residents with adequate and good infrastructure. In our training, the mayor and I attended, they talked quite a bit about infrastructure from 2 or 3 different people. One of the things that I found interesting was they said, when is the best time to start planning for infrastructure? And the answer is 30 years ago. So when is the second best time to start planning for infrastructure? And the answer is now. So.
I thought you were going to say 20 years ago.
Well, so anyway, I think that I want to commend our city staff. I think they've done an amazing job of doing a lot with the resources they've been given, but in the case of what Mike is talking about with the valves, you know, he used to have a line item in his budget where he had so much money a year to kind of go through and replace those bolts. I mean, it's a $1,200 repair that caused a $220,000 repair. Hopefully it's not going to be that much. They're hopeful it may not be quite that expensive, but I do think we need to consider that, giving them the capability to have that budget item to maintain the infrastructure so we don't have a costly repair. That could happen somewhere else. We don't know, you know?
I am a little surprised at what you're saying. Mike, we're going to probably want you to come respond to this. I was not aware that we had not taken full advantage when the NOLA Way was repaired and didn't do the infrastructure that we got Weber Basin to do. I thought that we were pretty much trying to always do that. And I guess I would say if we get into a position that we're not going to do something that you really think we should be doing, that it ought to be brought up in council, because otherwise we're not going to know. Does that make sense?
And in Mike's defense, that may have been Kevin talking to me.
Sure.
I mean, I've taken different conversations and kind of just compiled a brief overview. And I agree. I think that if we're not going to do something in the master plan, we should be considering that. I think it's been quite a while since the water rates were raised, and that
Really hasn't.
It hasn't been.
About 3 years.
Yeah, okay, so maybe not that long, but each year inflation is going to impact what they can do, so.
It's true.
These are not easy choices. I know that we can't just go raise rates on everyone. I'm just saying, what small steps can we as a city council do to help make sure that we're protecting that infrastructure?
Well, being sure that anything that's done underneath the road is done when the road is repaired is a big step, and I'm actually surprised that happened, because I thought we were doing it.
And in the case of NOLA Drive, they haven't replaced the road. Weber Basin came in and did their work according to the schedule they had outlined. We did not replace our culinary lines. My understanding is irrigation lines were not replaced, and the road was not replaced.
What was that last year that was done that was like 2 blocks north of me? Wasn't that NOLA and, oh, shoot, what's that?
So the first year that we did with Weber Basin was Casaloma.
Yeah, Castle.
Is the first one we did with them. So then the goal was to go over to NOLA. We have a 5-year plan that they'll be out of Casaloma subdivision. And so we'll have to drop back to last year and get NOLA, unless we have a good year where we can go get NOLA done along with that. But it was, you know, I think it come out to where we had a choice to either do 4th East or with the funding, or according to what Randy told me, we had a choice to do 4th East or NOLA Drive, and so he chose 4th East, which is part of getting the green still tank replacement done. That's a line that will feed over from the north to feed that. So, it made sense, but yeah. So, that answer.
I'm not trying to be critical.
No, and I understand that you're not. And I understand we don't have the funds to do everything that Mike Carlson wants to do too.
Well, but if there's, what I'm asking is that if there's something you think really should be done, I think we should know about it.
Well, I think we got to keep up with Weaver Basin. Randy went in and met with Tage and those guys, and Randy did good in the fact that he got them to get everything metered as far as irrigation water goes. And then this was an agreement that we would keep up with them. NOAA increased the cost for them because instead of, they had to patch the road basically where they wouldn't have done that before. So, we gave them the option also. I will state that they, could have backed off and waited a year, but they wanted to keep going. So, but yeah, we're looking at Cottonwood this year and 50 west or 50 east in front of Randy's old house to get that done, and then we're heading to Peachtree next. So we're looking at this year. We're looking at London Road to get done, and then Cottonwood and 50 is what we're looking at.
Where's Cottonwood?
Cottonwood is 1375 north. It makes a bend that goes up and ties into Casaloma. So.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We done? Great.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Mayor's report. I'll be quick. Went out the day after council last 2 weeks ago with Dave Walker, looked at the damage there, and of course we all know that we got a bid that we were pleasantly surprised on, and we've got the report on that. Went to League of City and Towns training with Councilwoman Hurst, as she's mentioned. It was a great reminder and some great new things as well too, and she gave a great report. So I went and hit on that more. I had a South Davis Metro Fire Board meeting. Not a lot took place. There was a swearing in of 3 new commissioners, which were the 3 new mayors. Plus, we always go over the monthly expenditures and approve those each month and the monthly financial. That's all we did other than the chief's report. Centerpoint Theater, Christy Woodward, who has been acting as the CFO to review things that the county does internally. She's a voluntary CFO. She has stepped down, and so we are looking for a new volunteer CFO at Centerpoint. If you have any names to give me, we gave Jansen a couple names, the Finance Committee to pursue. And then coming up, we got Ledge Day tomorrow, which I'll report on in a couple of weeks. I'm going as well as youth council members. I got a COG meeting tomorrow night. It'll be the first one of the year, so it'll have 9 new mayors that will be there. The LPC meetings start tomorrow. Bill and myself and Brant are voting members with Lisa as a alternate, and we're aware of those. And we will be reporting back to you at council every couple of weeks that we will be having weekly meetings for the duration of the session. And then expect in 2 weeks, and I apologize, didn't have this time, but because I didn't have resumes for everybody or volunteer forms, but I will have a planning commissioner name to run by you. I will have 5 landmarks commission members, so we can get you going there. We'll fill in with the 1 Parks and Rec person that we're missing on that board, one tree board member, and 1 Whitaker Museum member. And I've talked with all these people. I just haven't gathered resumes or volunteer forms, and I've committed to you that I would get those to you in advance. So be prepared to look at those names over the next couple of weeks. So that's my report. Any questions?
Thank you.
Great. City manager's report.
All right, thanks, Mr. Mayor. Mine's relatively short now. We discussed a number of the items throughout the meeting, which is great. First one is the council retreat. We couldn't get everybody to agree on a couple of days, which is okay. We haven't done a council retreat here. I don't know if ever we've had one. I think they're very helpful, and What I'd like to do is just schedule somewhat of a mini council retreat at a work session, just kind of a planning session to get together and start maybe team building of some sort. So Mayor and I will be working on that together. Mayor, anything else on that council retreat?
No, that's what we talked about.
Just want to let you know, so department heads, we had a staff meeting last week, to talk about COVID protocols. Each department is developing kind of their own. I didn't feel the need to develop a citywide protocol because each department has their own needs, and so each department is just trying to keep their employees safe, and Corey's already put together one, Mike's working on keeping his employees safe. So we're doing it at an department level. No mask mandate or anything like that. We were discussing possibly masks when you're in public areas or common areas for the time being, but nothing's solidified in that area. And then one item I bring up, Councilmember Hurst brought up, and that is the water fund in regards to this chase. I just want to throw this out there, and maybe I don't know if Nate will hate if I say this, but should the water fund be paying for the Chase Lane road repair because that's the issue that caused the damage? That's not been our practice, right, Mike, in the past? We've had all these leaks on Main Street and Transportation Fund is paying for it, but it's the water infrastructure which is actually causing the damage. So we're not seeing the true cost because we're absorbing in other departments. So technically, Nate, right? Should the water fund be paying for the Chase Lane road repair? Just, again, food for thought, not the way we've been operating, but just, it's tough taking the money from Mike's transportation for something that was unattested and not the fault of transportation, right?
Well, it's also more transparent with the public too.
Correct.
If they ask the question, well, what happened with the water? It's really what caused the repair.
The cost of doing business, being transparent of what things cost. We kind of move things around. And then lastly, for the record, I do not hate Councilmember Meekin. I just want that on the record. Any questions for me?
Can you confirm that on the record?
That's all I have, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Brent. Very good reports. It's been a great evening. Thank you for all your participation. Is there anything else that I've missed that needs to be brought up?
What's the last one on the?
Do we have a closed meeting?
Yeah. What's this discussion?
Are we going to do a closed session?
That's entirely up to this council. We had that on there if you wanted to discuss potentially cemetery property, but in light of our conversation earlier, I don't think a closed session is necessary at this time.
I was
But
thinking.
it's up to you, Mayor.
It would be in a couple of weeks after you got back with that more information. But that's just my thought unless you feel different, council. So if they don't see need for closed session, then I'd look for a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Council's adjourned.